Hello, somebody, and welcome to The Conversation. Do I have a show for you? I mean, every week, we try to outdo ourselves every single week, but I think we've done it. We've done it today. So I have the one and only renowned civil rights attorney extraordinaire in the galaxy, Mr. Charles Coleman Jr. himself. Attorney Coleman Jr., how you doing?
I'm well. I'm well. Thank you so much, Senator Turner. Hello, somebody. It is so good to be with you here this evening on the conversation. Super excited. I've done a bunch of these before, but this is my first time talking to you, and I can't tell you how much I've been looking forward to it.
I am so excited to be here with you. You have been lighting them up on mainstream media. I love to see it. It is really refreshing to have a group of truth tellers, and I believe I'm in that family too, who
Absolutely.
actually go on mainstream media and tell it. My grandmother used to say, tell it like it is. And you
Like a
tell it
TI
like
kid.
it is, like a TI is. Yes, you do. You have definitely been lighting them up, and I know you are no stranger to TYT. So we definitely love you and the TYT family so very much. So I want to kind of start lighthearted because we're gonna get down to some serious business. What does your T-shirt say?
This is Black Brilliance, and Black Brilliance is my brand. It is a brand that I curated out of a personal mantra that I began to sort of start using somewhere around 2011, 2012. And then it became a brand officially around 2013, 2014, sometime in that range. And it's a brand of apparel that is intended to express our brilliance as a people in whatever shape, form, or fashion we see necessary. We don't, generally speaking, find too many objections when our young people or members from our community stand up and say, I'm a thug, or I'm a D-boy, or I'm this, I'm that. And so the thought occurred to me, what would happen if we programmed and brainwashed an entire generation of our young people to start standing up and saying, yo, I'm brilliant. I'm brilliant in whatever capacity that I want to operate in. If I am a chef, I'm brilliant in the culinary arts. If I'm a skateboarder, I'm brilliant in movement. If I'm a dancer, I'm brilliant in terms of my expression of my body. If I'm a writer, I'm brilliant. And so getting us to recognize the different forms of what Black brilliance is and can be has been a motivation of mine. And that's the essence of the brand and sort of where this comes from. So this is my brand. I'm happy to showcase it on TYT. I'm happy to showcase it with you, who I'm also in the same tribe with of Black brilliance, as someone who's unafraid to speak unapologetically. So that's what this is about, Black brilliance.
Well, thank you. I certainly got to get my hands. I am going to get some of that gear so I can sport it too. Where do we find it?
Shopping, let's go.
Yes. How do we find it?
www.blackbrilliance.net. Go on there, we'll get you taken care of. That's it, blackbrilliance.net, real simple.
There it is. And I love how you say, and whatever we do, we bring our brilliance to the table. That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I'm glad that you were motivated and inspired to create something so positive. It reminds me of the saying, to be young, to be Black, and to be gifted. And you just expanded that to just to be, and to be Black and to be gifted. Young, seasoned. Just do what you do, but do it in brilliance.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. I'm glad we started off on some lighthearted stuff because now we're about
to get into it.
Get into it. So what does, I'm kind of torn. I want to kind of start with these cases first, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to resist that urge. So we're going to build up to this crescendo here. But in terms of, the fight, what does the fight look like in the 21st century for civil rights? I mean, you are a civil rights attorney, a champion. You are, I introduced you as such, but that was not over the top. This is your life's work. This is your vocation. This is what you have been called to do. And as you navigate the world, whether you're commentating on TV or standing before audiences or just talking to people about what civil rights looks like in the 21st century and making that comparison actually to what some of our forebears who are still alive, many of them are still alive from the 20th century. But if we go to the early part of the 20th century, if you had to make a comparison or just kind of walk us through what are some of the challenges within civil rights in the 21st century? What are the things that we should kind of keep in mind as we're trying to navigate this justice journey in our lifetime?
You know, I think about this question often because it's a question that I get a lot in my travels. People always ask, well, what should we be doing and how are things different and what does the future for our civil rights fight look like? And I have a number of different answers. The first answer is it looks very similar to the fight that we have been engaged in consistently since the peak of the civil rights era. In fact, I would argue that many of the same tactics and strategies from an ideological place need to remain in place, but we need at this point to double down on them in terms of our boldness and our audacity. Because what people have to understand is that the conversation about civil rights and the push for equitable spaces, the push for inclusion, the push for us to get what is owed to us is ever present. It may not necessarily have the same language, but it is just as insidious as it has always been throughout its entire history. And so it requires us to keep our foot on the gas. Now, in the space that we're in presently, one of the biggest pieces to that is understanding the journey that has been thus far. Too many of us do not understand the history of civil rights and our fight for civil rights in America. And that's by design. We know that because we see what is being done to school curriculums and in institutions of learning across America. We see the pushback against things like critical race theory, which is simply American history. We see people trying to keep you from understanding that history in a way that's going to arm you and inform you. So that's the first thing that I think is necessary, having a clear understanding of what the journey has been thus far. I think after that, and this is going to be very controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway, foundational Black Americans have to get to a point where we are comfortable pushing back in leftist progressive spaces that have weaponized inclusion and diversity as a means of diluting the voices of foundational Black America. I'm going to say that again. We as foundational Black Americans, American descendants of slavery, if you will, have to get to a point where we are comfortable having the uncomfortable conversation of pushing back in leftist and progressive spaces that have prioritized inclusion and diversity and almost weaponized that as a means of diluting our voice and our power in order to be able to say, no, we have to prioritize the things that are germane to our community. We cannot allow the notion of intersectionality and inclusion to carry the day when that has simply resulted in our concerns being diluted and pushed lower and lower to the bottom. And then,
Attorney, I would say when you say leftists, in those spaces, let's go a little deeper on that because I'm kind of
you want to probe.
I'm tracking with you. I want to see if we on the same track or we just adjacent to one another because that weaponization is something that I'm very concerned about as well. And I'm concerned about the Black community in particular being used in ways that does not advance the cause or causes of Black people as an entire community. That bothers me. And I do understand very clearly that women, we need our own thing sometimes. The bros need their own thing sometimes. But what I have been seeing very clearly over the last few years, particularly on the Democratic political side, because the Republicans just don't give a bleep, 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 is this separation, if you will, of Black women from Black men in ways that are not edifying. When historically we have been on a justice journey, maybe having some family fights along the way together. And I believe that we should continue to have those family conversations together and not allow any entity, that's a political party, etc., to separate us from each other as we continue to climb this mountain that there always going to be another mountain for us to climb when it comes to justice, and particularly when it comes to anti-Blackness. Racism certainly is one thing, and there are lots of other communities of color who have to deal with racism. But there is racism and there is anti-Blackness, and those two things absolutely go together. And sometimes our so-called allies don't get that. So when you talk about foundational Black people and what that means for us, and how we, in my opinion, are allowing these systems to use us in ways that do not edify our community for the long term.
That's exactly right. I think when you look at leftist politics, when you look at progressive politics, if you pay attention to the groups that typically align themselves with the left, that align themselves under the Democratic tent, if you will, keep in mind there's a conversation about progressives and then a separate conversation about immigrants. There's a conversation about progressives and then a separate conversation about the queer community and our brothers and sisters in that space. There's a conversation about progressives, and then there's a separate conversation about Latino Americans and our Latinx brothers and sisters because of the growing demographic that is there. There is not the same separation and individualized conversation on the left in a meaningful way. I'm not talking about in a performative way. I'm talking about in a meaningful way around Black America. And how do we know this to be true? We know it to be true because during the Democratic primary, for example, every candidate was polled and asked questions about reparations for Americans descendants of slavery. That conversation has evaporated into thin air. We know that because in large part, police reform has been viewed, which is already problematic in a number of ways, but we can talk about that at a different era. Police reform has been viewed as a policy measure primarily enacted or to be enacted for the benefit of Black Americans. That policy measure has been put on the back burner. Similarly, the conversation about protecting voting rights for communities of color, which is already a mixed conversation as is, has also, from a policy place, been put on the back burner. So when you look at the Democratic policy agenda, the policy agenda of what is considered to be the left, a progressive policy agenda, where is the space for foundational Black Americans in this country? That is what I think we have to be comfortable standing up and talking about and advocating for and pushing. And it doesn't mean that we aren't willing to work with our allies. It means that we are not going to work with our allies and sacrifice our own voices as we've done for far too long. And then the final piece on the current conversation around civil rights that I think is important is that we have to continue to be strategic. We have to revisit the lessons of old by constricting economic channels in America, because we know that America only respects two things: guns and butter. And so I'm not going to get on here and advocate for physical violence, because I don't think that that is in anyone's best interest, not at all. But what I will say is that when you make America feel it in the pocketbook, you get results. And so I think we have to think strategically about where and how we engage our economic spending power, our disposable income, which measures in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually, where we engage those things to cause economic stress points in a way that makes people actually listen. Because you're not listening for our vote. We've tried that, right? So that's why we have to engage these systems in a smart, strategic way that is based on history and data, that is bold, that is audacious, and that combines the technology and innovation of today with the strategy and ideology of yesterday.
There it is, and that is both for ourselves and for future generations. And I want to add to that being Black in America, being Black in the world, but we're talking about America right now, no matter how we identify, if you are Black, you are catching hell.
Amen.
Period. And it's systemic hell that we are really talking about here. We're not talking about some individual slights here and there. We're talking about a system that is working as it was designed and intended to work, whether it's political, social, economic, environmental, you name it, it is absolutely working. I mean, well, we're gonna need another session on this.
I told you it was coming tonight. The thing that is so important for allies who may be watching to understand in terms of where we are and why people may watch this and say, we got this black woman and this black man, and they really are aggressive in this conversation. But there's been so much progress, and why are they so aggressive? What for people who are in progressive spaces or who fashion themselves or present themselves as progressives need to understand is that anti-blackness is a global phenomenon, and as far as America is concerned, the legacy of white supremacy remains undefeated.
Come on.
Regardless of what it is that we are seeing in the spaces that we live in, regardless of what our circle of friends may suggest to us, oh, so-and-so looks like they're doing well, what have you. At a systemic level, the legacy of white supremacy in America remains undefeated. And so it does not matter where any one of us may be individually. When you talk about the condition of the collective, of what it is to be black in America, that is a condition which has not changed. And so the question then becomes, if you label yourself as a progressive, are you radical enough to step to white supremacy and be part of dismantling it? Because right now, its track record is undefeated in America, and it requires all hands on deck.
That's it. And you just made me, thinking about undefeated made me think about boxing as an example. And you know how they would hold up the fist of the boxer who won, the heavyweight champion of the world. Well, the heavyweight champion of the world from an ideological standpoint, you just named it. You just named it, Attorney Coleman. And thinking about it in that way, the heavyweight champion of the world from an ideological perspective is white supremacy. And you absolutely right, it has been undefeated. And we can get into the Afrocentric view and the Eurocentric view and ethnocentrism and all of that stuff to really peel back the layers and help people to really understand that we can't play with this. If you want to be a true ally to bump up against anti-blackness and racism, which I believe is the foundational point for most all of the isms, whether it's sexism, ageism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, you name it. In this country, I'm saying, the foundational point to that is anti-blackness. And as we study and track this nation's history, as Black people have gained more liberation, so has other oppressed people, because we paved the trail in the United States of America. And all over the world, people emulate the popular culture, the pop culture of the Black community. People want all of our assets, but none of the liabilities that have been injected and infected into our community. And what you and I, Attorney Coleman, is talking about tonight is that everybody, or today, whenever people are watching all over the world, but that everybody, lottie-dottie and everybody, as my grandmother had used to say, has a role to play in dismantling this thing if they have a consciousness to do it. And that's where that comes in, Attorney, a consciousness.
You are preaching a sermon right now, and I will pass the collection plate and put it this way. The bill of what it costs to secure rights of equality for every group in America and throughout American history, from women's suffrage all the way up to same-sex marriage. That bill has been paid through credit. And the credit has come from the sacrifice of Black bodies, Black voices, Black ideas, and Black lives. And so there is a debt that everyone who has benefited from those sacrifices owes in order to get that credit report straight.
Come on.
And my position is that it requires a recognition by progressives on the left that that is necessary, but also a demand and ask, a clear request from us as a community to say, no more. It's time for you to pay what you owe.
Yeah, that's it. It's a debt. It's a justice debt that everybody got to be in on. Everybody has to be in on. So, oh my God, I'm serious. We got to do this again. Now, I gotta, ask you about these two cases, but I'm just feeling something. You made me think about when Minister Malcolm X gave that speech, the ballot or the bullet.
Yes.
And he was not.
That's why
I got it. He was not advocating for violence for the sake of violence, but he was putting this country on notice. First, identifying, without mincing words, the conundrum, the problem, the essence of what was wrong, and then saying to this country, you got some choices. It's either gonna be the ballot or the bullet, because the powder keg that is building up. And to me, the Black Lives Matter movement itself was the 21st century iteration of that buildup that we've had, and that reckoning, that reminder, I should say, that we always have generation after generation about the unfinished business in this nation when it comes to Black lives, Black minds, Black body, just Black everything. And where, to me, Attorney Coleman, where that intersectionality comes in is that the Black liberation struggle itself, like, to me, Black people are the original progressives, because it don't get no more progressive than fighting for your very livelihood, your very lives generation after generation. But this is the thing that brings our other sisters and brothers in from other identities, whether they're ethnic, racial, age identity, sexual orientation, gender. Absolutely. This is where the connection is that the Black struggle is always linked to a human struggle. In other words, that in this country, whenever Black people have made so-called gains, it has never been just for the Black community. All marginalized people either have a roadmap to liberation and collectively benefit from that. We saw that in the civil rights, but go ahead.
And that's where that debt comes from. I know that we are supposed to be talking about these cases, and so I'm gonna make it easy for you and tie this in a way that our viewers can understand very quickly.
Please.
For anyone who is questioning the degree of progress that we have made as a country, you needn't look any further than the past month and the way that these cases have played out. And I'm referring specifically to the case against Kyle Rittenhouse in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as well as the case against the two McMichaels and Mr. Bryan in Brunswick, Georgia. Why do I say that? In 1854, I believe it was, the Supreme Court made a decision in a case called Sanford versus Dred Scott.
Yep.
In that case, the Supreme Court held that the Black man had no rights, which the white man was bound to respect.
Yeah.
What did that do? It effectively codified the system of white supremacy in such a way that placed white men at the top of the totem pole. It essentially gave white men free reign of society over pretty much everything and everyone. And the whispers of that case can be seen throughout both the Rittenhouse trial
and Keep the Fight. And let's not be afraid to do the hard work that is necessary to ensure that justice reigns supreme for all of God's creation.
I'm back to gaslighting. Did you and I talk about gaslighting on Old School?
Probably.
That boss gaslit all his female employees. People who manipulate others like that make you feel like you're the weirdo. Why won't you punch yourself in the face? What is wrong with you? And you're like, oh my God, I feel so bad. Why didn't I just punch myself in the face and poke my eye out? I'm 47 and I just figured it out like earlier this year.
You figured out somebody was doing it to you, or that you were
that it was that it would have been happening my whole life and I didn't realize it.
Right.
Welcome to Indisputable. I'm your host, Dr. Rashad Richard. We got a lot happening today. But what do we do on this show? We tell the truth. You know why we tell the truth? Because the truth is simply indisputable.
Rashad, great to be here. Congratulations on the new show. And I gotta let everybody know that Rashad and I go way back.
Here's the pattern that we see in all of these Karen stories. They think they own stuff they do not own. Now, where does that come from? I don't know, maybe slavery. Maybe they think they should still own black people.
This is what happens when Karens weaponize the police.
When you're used to privilege, equality seems like oppression.
It hits you in a certain way when someone is holding you against your will, treating you like you're a criminal and you're an innocent person. This is something that black people face no matter where they are.
A stronger black economy lends itself to a stronger, greater economy. Don't think it's exclusive of you, it's inclusive of you.
What's your beef with critical race theory?
It adds more fuel to the fire of the racist tendencies that we already have.
We have a generation of problem solvers that can remedy the problem if they are properly taught what the problem is.
You know who created redlining in this country? It was a white liberal.
I don't give a damn who created it. If it's a racist policy, Shelley, here's what I don't know. I don't know. See, there you go filibustering, brother. You're scared of this truth, but you're gonna get it, though.
Do all of you know the Young Turks?
An outlet like yourself that are willing to cover this story from the very beginning.
You have the Young Turks and a bunch of other progressive forces saying this is the time to fight for our values.
And I think right now there are a lot of progressive voters, many leftists who feel like they don't have a home.
And this is why what Cenk and the Young Turks are doing is so important.
What we've done is sustainable, slow, healthy growth. And I think that's the way news should be, where you don't rely on sensationalist stuff. You don't lean on whatever's trendy in the news at any given moment. You know, you just go with the truth.
You gave me a platform.
You've uplifted so many other progressive voices through this network, and you're constantly looking for people that you can amplify through the work we do, through the infrastructure that you built at TYT.
It takes those early people who believe that can really be the seeds of this movement, and that has been the Young Turks.
We're super serious about the news. We also managed to do it in a way that is fun and lighthearted. We're not TYT, you're TYT.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Iadarola. This is gonna be a big one. Meanwhile, in the Arctic, you know where this is going. You watch the Damage Report, the Arctic's on fire. Obviously, why would we be talking about the Arctic except to tell you that it's melting once again? The Republicans aren't that interested in it. I wonder why. Lift out of poverty up to 3.7 million people, including an estimated 1.3 million children. Hashtag save the children? Not if it costs money. I mean, come on.
Welcome to TYT. It is good to be back, especially for Solo Hour Wednesdays, where we're gonna rock it. I'm gonna talk about the MLB lockout. Yeah, that's right, it's a sports story, but it's also a labor story, which I'm gonna get to the nitty-gritty of. It's a fascinating story, and honestly, the first lockout for the MLB in over 30 years. So we'll talk about what that labor dispute is and more. In the second hour of the show today, John Iadarola will be joining me to talk about the craziest example of revisionist history you've heard from a right winger in a long time. And that's saying something because that's really their bread and butter, revisionist history. We're also gonna talk about how someone has in fact been arrested for smoking trees in New York City. What is the deal with that? Well, it has to do with the alleged war on Christmas. Was Fox News correct about that? You're just gonna have to wait and find out. Again, that's in the second hour of the show. But as always, please like and share this stream if you're watching us on YouTube. Get the word out about the show. Help us in any way you can. It helps to keep the show sustainable, and it also helps to get our message out there. And as always, thank you for helping us remain sustainable and independent. You can become a member by clicking on that join button if you're watching us on YouTube, or by going to tyt.com/join. All right, without further ado, let's get to our first insane story. Fossil fuel companies, along with Republican lawmakers, are planning on further co-opting anti-woke rhetoric in an effort to protect the lucrative business model for fossil fuel companies. This story is absolutely insane, and it revolves around an email that was obtained by Alex Koch, a former colleague of ours, does great investigative reporting. And the email was written by the director of the Texas Public Policy Foundation. This is a right-wing group, and they're very much in favor of protecting fossil fuel profits. What it says is this: this morning at the ALEC committee meetings, you'll have the opportunity to push back against the woke financial institutions that are colluding against American energy producers. Now let's stop for a second and just discuss what he's referring to there. There's been one avenue in which activists have been incredibly successful in essentially persuading banks to stop investing money in fossil fuel companies, stop lending money to fossil fuel companies. We've seen some movement there, and it's been positive movement. But as always, whenever there's some positive movement for activists, lobbyists get together with these corporations and try to figure out a way to squash those efforts. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Let me give you some more details. This email, again, obtained by Alex Koch for the Center for Media and Democracy, indicates that, they're trying to make an argument that the anti-fossil fuel activism is really just discrimination. So on one hand, they're claiming, these woke activists are awful, they're so terrible, and also poor fossil fuel companies, they're being discriminated against. I'm not kidding, that's really what their argument is. And there are ramifications for this, especially when you consider the fact that our Supreme Court has deemed corporations human beings. Let me give you more. So, they've looked into how Glenn Youngkin succeeded in Virginia's gubernatorial race by manufacturing a culture war, right? By really leaning into the fear mongering on the right regarding critical race theory. And so fossil fuel companies, with the help of ALEC, a lobbying group, decided, well, why don't we just use that same strategy to protect fossil fuel companies? ALEC's Energy, Environment and Agriculture Task Force voted to back two pieces of model legislation that portray climate policy, even climate policy that doesn't even exist, as unfairly discriminating against fossil fuel companies. So what exactly is this legislation? Understand that during this meeting with ALEC, with Republican lawmakers, with fossil fuel companies, they voted on this resolution. They voted on this draft legislation, which they're now going to push Republican lawmakers to both introduce and pass through Congress. What does this entail? Well, the Energy Discrimination Elimination Act directs states to compile a list of entities that are supposedly boycotting fossil fuel companies, explicitly citing banks that are increasingly denying financing to credit-worthy fossil energy companies solely for the purpose of decarbonizing their lending portfolios and marketing their environmental credentials. So step number one, try to find the banks, the lenders, the potential investors that are taking a stand against fossil fuels in the name of doing something about climate change. And then after you list who they are, it's time to target them. But to do so through legal means based on this proposed legislation that in their minds would ideally pass. The act also cites institutional investors that are divesting from fossil energy companies and pressuring corporations to commit to the goal of the Paris Agreement to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 0 by 2050, and large investments that are colluding to force energy companies to cannibalize their existing business or businesses. And what this legislation would do, should it pass in Congress, is it would allow for state controllers would be directed to create and maintain a list of all financial companies that boycott energy companies, further allowing them to, quote, request written verification from a financial company that it does not boycott energy companies. Any company that does not reply to said request within 61 days per the model bill would be presumed to be boycotting energy companies. All right, great. So they've got this nice little list, and let me just make sure you all know it would be a very short list of financial institutions or investors who refuse to do business with fossil fuel companies. And then what would they do with that list? What would happen to these financial institutions or to these investors who don't want to invest in fossil fuel companies? Listed companies that don't stop boycotting energy companies within 90 days would then be subject to losing state contracts or investments. State agencies would then be required to sell, redeem, divest, or withdraw all publicly traded securities in qualifying companies unless that would result in a loss in value or a benchmark deviation. In fact, attorneys general would actually be empowered to enforce rules mandating that state agencies report which companies are refusing to invest in fossil fuel companies and essentially go after them if they are in fact boycotting fossil fuel companies. So what this proposed legislation written by ALEC would do is punish any financial institution or any investor who, based on a political point, based on wanting to do something in regard to climate change, has refused to invest in fossil fuel corporations and companies. That's what this is. Punish them for not investing their money in fossil fuels. Think about how insane that is. And this is something that is going to be championed by members of the Republican Party. And listen, we have a ton of criticism for Democrats. We do not discriminate on this show when it comes to political parties. There's corruption and bad behavior on both sides. There's no question about that. But when you consider the fact that the Republican Party consistently argues that they're the party of freedom, that they believe in free markets, that they believe that it's wrong to censor people, it's wrong to force people to do things they don't want to do. They are literally, in this case, pushing for legislation that would punish financial institutions and investors who refuse to invest in fossil fuel companies, who boycott fossil fuel companies. Both draft laws, by the way, exhibit the emerging right-wing argument that policy that reduces emissions is discriminatory. Right, so that's the argument that they're making here, and they're using the precedent set by anti-BDS legislation to make this argument. Okay, so major banks and investment firms, Isaac, the gentleman we heard from earlier, argued in his email to participants, urging them to vote for the measure are colluding to deny lending and investment in fossil fuel companies, using their market power to force companies to make green investments. The model legislation opposes that, he adds, by setting forth a strategy in which states use their collective economic purchasing power to counter the rise of politically motivated and discriminatory investing practices. So some of you might wonder, how the hell can anyone discriminate against a corporation? Like, corporations aren't people, right? Except our Supreme Court has noted in their Citizens United ruling that corporations are in fact people. How disastrous is that? But it goes further. As I mentioned earlier, this is modeled after anti-BDS bills. What is that? Well, the legislation is modeled explicitly on anti-BDS bills written to counter the boycott, divest, sanctions call from Palestinian civil society groups for economic sanctions against firms complicit in the Israeli occupation there. So corporations are like, ooh, that is delicious. Look at what they're doing in regard to political activism for human rights for Palestinians. Maybe we can expand upon that and use it to our advantage and pretend that that woke activists are attacking us unfairly and we're being discriminated against. And so those who are discriminating against us by boycotting us need to be dealt with appropriately. That's what this story is about. And it's terrifying. Again, because of two different reasons. Because of the Supreme Court deeming corporations human beings, which is insane. And because this is modeled after anti-BDS bills, which haven't completely been struck down by our Supreme Court. And our Supreme Court is an issue as well because, as we've learned, the conservative members who were confirmed as Supreme Court justices are very much pro-business, pro-corporate. I would be a little concerned about them voting in favor of protecting the corporate interests in this case, as opposed to the freedoms of financial institutions or investors. It's pretty incredible. And by the way, if you're wondering whether this has been tested at all, it actually has in the state of Texas. Texas already has a similar law on the books. Arguing in favor of the bill, Texas State Representative Dennis Paul said there was a need to, quote, stand up to this wokeness. It's incredible. This country is governed by corporate greed and corporate interests. And while we do have a problem with discrimination in this country, in regard to actual human beings, in regard to actual disenfranchised groups of people, that just gets pushed aside. In fact, not just pushed aside, the messaging and activism surrounding that gets co-opted in order to protect corporate interests. In this case, fossil fuel companies. It's absolutely sick. And by the way, a lot of great independent outlets like the New Republic wrote about this, but not much coverage elsewhere. So thank you for supporting TYT and giving us a platform to be able to share these stories as much as we can. All right, let's move on to a little bit of international news. Some pretty devastating news coming out of the Biden administration, which shouldn't be so surprising these days. While President Joe Biden ran on holding Saudi Arabia accountable for the slaughter, the murder of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi, the White House has actually released a statement indicating that it condemns any congressional effort that would block weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. Now, before we get to the details of what that statement indicated, I just want to give you guys a little reminder of what campaign Biden looked like. Let's watch.
Khashoggi was in fact murdered and dismembered, and I believe in the order of the Crown Prince. And I would make it very clear, we were not going to in fact sell more weapons to them. We were going to in fact make them pay the price and make them in fact the pariah that they are.
Look at that, tough Biden. Make them the pariah that they are. He's gonna hold them accountable for what they did to Khashoggi. That's why he ordered a study to make sure that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was in fact the one who ordered the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And once he ordered that study and once it was confirmed, he did absolutely nothing about it. Tough guy. Did he actually make the Saudis pariahs? No, he did not do that. In fact, the White House, again, condemns any effort to block weapons sales, United States weapons sales to Saudi Arabia, which then get used in the war in Yemen, which we'll get to the details and the hideous nature of that war in just a second. But let me give you some more in regard to the statement coming from the White House. The administration, the statement reads, strongly opposes passage of SJ Resolution 31, a joint resolution prohibiting a proposed US foreign military sales case to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia of defense articles, including 280 advanced medium range air-to-air missiles and related articles and services. So again, these weapons are being used for a brutal war in Yemen, which, by the way, the United States has been helping Saudi Arabia carry out. But the White House pretends as though it's in favor, this is the best part, that they're in favor of approaching that conflict in Yemen in a diplomatic way. I mean, their version of diplomacy is selling weapons to the aggressor, Saudi Arabia. That is apparently the White House's idea of diplomacy. And they also included this following statement in the exact memo. The US foreign military sales case at issue is fully consistent with the administration's pledge to lead with, I mean, you can't make it up, to lead with diplomacy to end the conflict in Yemen and end US support for offensive operations in the war in Yemen. How do you end the war in Yemen? By giving Saudi Arabia weapons, by selling weapons to them. That doesn't end war. That exacerbates it, and they know it, they know it. The fact that that's the second paragraph in their statement, they just brazenly lie to you and get away with it. It's incredible. While also ensuring that Saudi Arabia has the means to defend itself from Iranian-backed Houthi air attacks. Oh, you mean the Saudi Arabia that is intentionally holding back oil production to ensure that gas prices spike so they can profit as much as humanly possible? That's Saudi Arabia? The Saudi Arabia that gave Biden the middle finger when Biden's like, hey, can you guys produce more oil, please? That's Saudi Arabia? Pathetic. Oil-rich country needs the United States to help them defend themselves from who? I mean, it is unbelievable. Now, as we know, Biden's approval ratings, not good, very bad. Very bad. People are saying that Biden is not popular. Neither is Kamala Harris. And I would argue that maybe all those broken promises tend to hurt politicians. They think Americans aren't paying attention, but I don't know, I'd venture to say that they are. Especially when you see the feelings of the Democratic base reflected in these low approval ratings. Now, the Data for Progress also found a pretty strong majority of people who are against the weapons sales to Saudi Arabia. Let's take a quick look at this graph that gives you a sense of just how widespread the lack of support for this $650 million US arms sales to Saudi Arabia really is. All likely voters, 64% of them oppose. You look at Democrats, 63% of them oppose the weapons sale. 64% of independents oppose the weapons sale. And even Republicans, 64% oppose the weapons sale. But the White House, unfortunately, got exactly what it wanted. Despite efforts by some lawmakers to block the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia, the Senate decided to vote in favor of going ahead with this. Okay, going ahead with the weapons sale. So let me give you the context. There was legislation proposed by a bipartisan group of senators. Bernie Sanders is included in that. You've got Rand Paul included in this effort. You have Mike Lee included in this effort. But it didn't matter. Senate resoundingly defeats effort to block Saudi arms sale, 30 to 67. The vote split the Democratic caucus, but the vast majority of Republicans backed the Biden administration's proposed sale. I mean, look, the GOP is gonna GOP, right? Republicans, of course, are like, yeah, let's sell the weapons. Historically, that's where they've been. But Democrats try to present themselves as something completely different when they're running their campaigns. They pretend as if they're different from the Republican Party. But the, infusion of corporate cash in campaigns really does lead to a huge portion of the Democratic Party looking a lot like the Republican Party, especially when it comes to bread and butter issues, when it comes to defense issues, national security issues, whatever. Anything that actually has an impact on redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top. That's where you see corporate Democrats in cahoots with Republicans, even if they campaign as something different. So why does this happen? Why does this redistribution of wealth from the bottom to the top happen? Why is it that the majority of Americans, both Democrats and Republicans, are not in favor of this weapons sale to Saudi Arabia, yet Congress still moves forward with it? Why? Let's look at the money. In the past 2 decades, for instance, according to Open Secrets, defense contractors and their extensive network of lobbyists and donors have directed $285 million in campaign contributions and $2.5 billion in lobbying spending to influence defense policy. That's just in 2 decades. To further these goals, they hired more than 200 lobbyists who have worked in the same government that regulates and decides funding for their industry. Oh, it's interesting that they should mention that. I remember when Joe Biden was appointing people to his cabinet, and I raised alarm in regard to how many of those people had very cozy ties to corporate interests. In the case of the Defense Department, the Secretary of State, I was concerned with the person he chose because that individual had incredibly close ties to the private defense contractors who do quite a bit of lobbying to ensure that they fill their pockets. They get to sell their weapons to countries that might end up being a huge problem to our national security in the future. So here's a few examples of the goons I'm talking about. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken consulted for a private equity firm that emphasized its access, network, and expertise in the defense industry. Austin also had a seat at the United Technologies and Raytheon board, earning more than $250,000 from the now merged companies. And of course, when you look at Saudi Arabia specifically, Saudi Arabia benefits from the influence wielded by major US arms manufacturers that would like to sell to them. Just 4 of the biggest companies received 90% of promised sales between 2009 and 2019. Those 4, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, General Dynamics, and Boeing, happen to make up 4 of the top 5 defense-related companies spending the most on lobbying, pouring over $10 million each into their policy influence efforts in 2020 alone. Listen, there are very few politicians who are principled. There are very few politicians who do the right thing. One of those politicians has consistently been Senator Bernie Sanders, and he explains perfectly in this next video why arming Saudi Arabia and allowing Saudi Arabia to use our weapons in the war in Yemen is so disastrous. Let's watch.
We should be demanding that they end the devastating war in Yemen, which has killed over 230,000 people in one of the very poorest countries on earth. For more than 6 years, the Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen's civil war has been a key driver of the largest humanitarian disaster in the world, the largest. According to UNICEF, 4 out of every 5 children in Yemen needs humanitarian assistance. That is over 11 million children. 400,000 children suffer from severe malnutrition. 1.7 million children have been displaced from their homes by violence from this war. and some 15 million people, more than half of whom are children, do not have access to safe water, sanitation, or hygiene.
So let's be clear about something. When the Republican Party claims that they care about babies, they care about human lives in the context of ending reproductive rights in America, just understand that they don't stand for a damn thing. They certainly do not stand for protecting human lives because they just voted to allow for weapons to be sold to Saudi Arabia to continue that brutality against the Yemeni people, including Yemeni children. That's the fact of the matter. I would love the media to connect those two dots, but they never do. It's disgusting. We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll tell you why the CEO of Better.com is really the worst. What's up, everyone? Welcome to our social break. Let's read some member comments. Eclectic Miscellanea says, for hour one, it's Anna against the world. Thank you. Hopefully you guys are joining me in that effort. We've got Ice Cream and Cake saying, call me crazy, but getting a bank loan is not a human right. I guess for these fossil fuel companies, they really do see it as a human right. Did I miss something? I Am Sock says, invest in the destruction of the planet or you're out of the club. It's even worse than that. Not only are you out of the club, but we will destroy you. Like your financial institution won't even exist anymore. We've got Occam's Taser. Man, this administration does not give a flying F about anyone or anything now that it won their election. Yeah, but we're in for a world of trouble in 2024. And they just seem completely unfazed by that. It's pretty incredible. Shikata writes in and says, the business of America is giving Americans the business. Let's move over to our super chat comments. We've got Fab Dragon who says, Republicans, if people don't like a product, they don't have to buy it, and that is how the invisible hand works. Also, Republicans, we will destroy you if you don't buy our product. Yidis writes in and says, copium addicts unite. I'm not sure what that's a reference to, but sure, that sounds great. Jeremy Actons writes in and says, so protesting is on its way to being abolished, but freedom is our heritage. I mean, how many different states proposed legislation that would allow drivers to like run protesters over if they're blocking the street? Yeah, the whole thing about freedom, the whole framing of freedom coming from the right wing is rich because they actively try to roll back our civil liberties, our freedoms. What they really talk about in regard to freedom is ensuring that corporations get to do anything and everything they want. That in their minds is freedom. And in regard to freedom of speech, they're only referring to their freedom of speech. If you're saying things they don't like, of course they want to censor you. I mean, the legislation meant to attack BDS activists is a perfect example of that. You don't have to be in favor of the BDS movement, you don't have to be part of the BDS movement, but it's important to protect their rights because their rights are the same rights that we want to protect for ourselves, right? Ariel writes in and says, seeing a political question not differ by party is such a rare sight. You'd think politicians would respond, but you'd be forgetting the corruption. Exactly, it's such a great point. All right, special thanks to our Twitch subs and our Twitch community. We have Schwiff Toidle, 15 months tier 1 with the comment. 15 months with the Salt Queen, more please. We also have Doc Wagon Dragon, 10 months tier 1 with the comment, this is nuts. If they're going to treat corporations as people, then don't other people have the rights to protest? So wouldn't this potential law violate a person's right to protest then? You would think so. You would definitely think so. But remember, in the state of Texas, a pro-BDS teacher got fired because she was in favor of that movement. So there have already been some casualties of this kind of thinking in the country. It's sick. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian with you. Let's get to our next story. It is the worst. So, Better.com, not doing so good. It's a digital mortgage lender with offices in Oakland, and it just laid off 900 employees all at once, all during a Zoom meeting. I'm not even kidding. So here's CEO Vishal Garg carrying out the mass firing.
The market has changed, as you know, and we have to move with it in order to survive so that hopefully we can continue to thrive and deliver on our mission. This isn't news that you're going to want to hear, but ultimately it was my decision, and I wanted you to hear from me. It's been a really, really challenging decision to make. This is the second time in my career I'm doing this, and I do not want to do this. The last time I did it, I cried. This time I hope to be stronger. But we are laying off about 15% of the company. If you're on this call, you are part of the unlucky group being laid off. Your employment here is terminated, effective immediately.
What? I mean, look, don't feel bad for the employees, 900 of them who were part of that call. Feel bad for the poor CEO who raked in a $25 million bonus last year. Because the last time he had to do it, he cried. And so this is a very, very traumatic experience for him, okay? Let's show some compassion, let's show some sympathy. What a garbage human being. Really, the foe, oh, I'm just really heartbroken over this. I don't really care too much to meet with you individually. I'm just doing this all suddenly, without any warning, through a Zoom call. But I want you guys to understand, of course he's not like experiencing grief because he's doing this. It's a super easy process for him. He doesn't have to see anyone face to face. He doesn't have to deal with anyone's tears, anyone freaking out in his office over the fact that they have families to feed. He gets to do it through a Zoom call, 900 people, and he just pretends like it's really tearing him apart. It's a really difficult thing to do. Now, he got backlash for this because some of the employees who had been terminated filmed the whole thing and put out the video, which is why we have it. So thank you to those employees, and I feel awful for them. But since he got some backlash, he decided the best way to handle this is to trash the employees who I fired. Yeah, it's a good play. So he wrote this. You guys know that at least 250 of the people terminated were working an average of 2 hours a day while clocking in 8+ hours a day in the payroll system. They were stealing from you and stealing from our customers who pay the bills that pay our bills. Get educated, Garg wrote, according to a blind post viewed by Fortune. Now, Fortune hit him up and was like, yo, are you the one who wrote this? And he confirmed, yes. He is in fact the person who wrote that callous and disgusting post. I don't believe him. Besides which, isn't that a failure for the executive team? If they hired a bunch of people and had them working only 2 hours a day, it seems like there was some incompetence at the very top. But anyway, let me give you more. He said this after confirming that he had written that callous post. I think they should have been I think that could have been phrased differently, but honestly, the sentiment is there. Now, the dude is super wealthy, okay? So he might be really holding back tears. But in reality, the Daily Beast reports that he obtained a $25 million bonus in 2020. That's 1 year. That's just his bonus. That's just his bonus. And the company's valuation indicates that it's worth a lot of money, $7 billion to be exact, okay? And why did this happen? I just want to be clear. This didn't happen because, the company is really struggling, we're failing, we don't know what to do, we're not making enough revenue in order to carry all these employees. No, this is part of a deal that the executives at Better made with the investors, because they just got a pretty nice chunk of change, okay? So let me give you those details, because this is what really goes on. This is how business really works. Blank check company Aurora Acquisition Corp and SoftBank have decided to amend the terms of their financing agreement to provide Better with half of the $1.5 billion they committed immediately instead of waiting till the deal closes. Under the new arrangement, capital hits the company's balance sheet now faster than originally planned and puts more money on the balance sheet overall to fuel further growth. Now, when they talk about growth, they're talking about an increase in profits. And how does a corporation increase their profits? By cutting costs. That's one of the ways that they do it. And what is the most costly element of a business? It's the labor. So during these negotiations, I have no doubt that the argument was, listen, we can cut a significant percentage of our workforce, which will then increase profits and will provide you a better return on your investment. Capiche? Does that sound good to you? So this was something predetermined in the negotiating process. That's how it works. And by the way, CEOs usually have their compensation tied to, let's say, if it's a publicly traded company, to the value of the shares in the stock market. Their pay is tied to the equity that they have in the company. And so it's really killing two birds with one stone. It's providing a higher, return on investment for the investors, which is what they want. And based on how the compensation package is set up for the executives, they get an increase in pay as well. So they get rewarded for doing what the CEO did here. And by the way, the backlash wasn't just from ordinary Americans like you and me. Apparently, 3 different executives decided to resign after this whole debacle, all of them working in the PR area of the company. And I can kind of understand why. Who the hell wants to do positive PR or do spin after this story has exposed the callous nature of how this business really works? But it's not just this business. This is how the model works in most companies, in most corporations. The CFO, for instance, his name is Kevin Ryan, said this: "We pulled forward the funding of our SPAC deal. With this new structure, the company will fortify our balance sheet and position us as extremely well capitalized in a tough mortgage market. Surviving is winning and capital ensures survival. But by the end of this week, we expect to have $1 billion of cash on the company's balance sheet." And then later, while talking with TechCrunch, he said this: "Having to conduct layoffs is gut-wrenching." Really, they're really torn up about it, especially this time of the year. Remember, Christmas is coming up. However, a fortress balance sheet and a reduced and focused workforce together set us up to play offense going into a radically evolving homeownership market. So guys, just again, every time you hear about the Great Resignation, every time you hear about workers refusing to go back to the companies that they used to work for or were working for during the pandemic or before the pandemic, this is the messaging that workers get across the country in various companies, various businesses. They're told over and over again that they're disposable, that they're not valued, that the companies that they devote their time and energy for not only refuse to share the wealth generated by their labor, but that they could be fired at any moment through a Zoom call with hundreds of other colleagues. And it doesn't matter. They'll pay lip service about how torn up they are, about, oh, we're so torn up. I cried last time. But at the end of the day, they don't give a crap about you, because they want to provide the return on investment for the investors and ensure that the executives get a nice little compensation package. They're not crying about it. This is how it really works. This was predetermined through the negotiations. And I love seeing the CEO get dragged the way he deserves to. I hope more of these executives take a stand and step down. Who the hell wants to be associated with a company like this? But again, it's not just about this company. This is what goes on in most major corporations, most multinational corporations, throughout this country. Workers are considered disposable, even though they're the ones who generate the revenue that allows for the corporation to exist and thrive in the first place. Anyway, we gotta take a break. I can go on about that story much, much longer, but we gotta go. So let's take a break. When we come back, I'm gonna take a stab at the MLB lockout story. So stick around, you don't wanna miss it. What's up, everyone? Welcome to our social break. Let's go to, you guys gotta write in some more comments, man. What's going on here? Super chats, you're lagging, like, come on. We've got some member comments though. The Dragon who says knee, he cried tears of joy as his stocks rose a few points. So they're not publicly traded. This is an SPAC situation, which is kind of complicated and difficult to explain. But his pay, I guarantee you, is tied to firing these employees, because it's all about increasing profits. And the easiest way to do that is to cut the workforce. What a complete waste of skin. Greg writes in and says, the fact that he's had to do this more than once would suggest that he's terrible at running his business. Sounds like he's the one who should be fired. Absolutely. Tall Glass of Shut Up Juice writes in and says, the worst boss CEO. I won't get my $25 million bonus this year if I don't fire 900 of you. Oh yeah, Merry Christmas. Peter Hamby in our super chat section has another poem for us. To better himself, he zooms hundreds out of work to worsen himself. That was a good one. Static Rich says, met a really nice guy at work today, talked about video games for hours. I found out he listens, to Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, may have convinced him to check out TYT. Here's hoping. Let's also hope that Cenk doesn't call right-wingers stupid, because we want to get them on our side, right? We want to convince them that the side that they've been with has been lying to them, and they're better off coming to the bright side. So there's that. Moondragon says that $25 million bonus is $27,778 per employee fired. It's a very lucrative deal there, right? A lot of money to fire people and make their lives miserable. Min Farshaw Dragons, 2 months prime in our Twitch community, says, glad to be a member with Bezos Bucks. I work third shift stocking groceries and I'm usually asleep during the broadcast, but I woke up early today, so I get to watch live. Keep up the good work. We need your voices. Much love from New Jersey. Third shift, that's insane. I remember working at a grocery store, and restocking the shelves is not easy, especially when you're 18 and weigh like 110 pounds and you can't lift heavy items. Paige Lars says, 8 months prime, can I get an early happy 32nd birthday shout out? Hell yeah. Happy birthday. On my 8th month anniversary, thanks for real news and honesty. You're welcome. Thank you so much for supporting us. Oddly Magical also gave 1,000 bits with the comment, Anna keeping it real. And then I also wanted to just give you guys a quick note. Holiday shopping is tough. You can give the gift of TYT membership. Just go to tyt.com/gift to learn more. All right, guys, I am not a sports reporter. In fact, I'm a little terrified in covering this next story because while it is a sports story, it's also a labor story. And I care about the labor angle, and I want to share it with you guys. So if I get anything wrong in terms of phrasing, or maybe I use the wrong word because it's a sports thing, forgive me. But I think the angle here, the heart of the story is important, and it has to do with the MLB lockout. So let's talk about it. Thanks to an ongoing labor dispute, Major League Baseball is undergoing its first work stoppage, its first lockout in more than 30 years. Now, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred, who has no chill, announced a lockout after a 5-year collective bargaining agreement between the owners of the 30 clubs and the players expired. Now, this does have negative ramifications for the players. For instance, right now, the calendar favors ownership, okay? Players can't sign free agent deals, and they're going to get anxious about that. And that's according to Professor Michael Leroy, who's a sports labor expert over at the University of Illinois. Now, there's also other ramifications for the players. For instance, teams are not allowed to talk to players, make major league signings or swing trades. And facilities where the players usually train in, those are shut down, they can't use them. I mean, it's gonna be a difficult situation for the players. And I think in the near future, potentially a difficult situation for the owners as well. The reason why right now the owners get the advantage is because of where we are in the year. So the new baseball season isn't for a few months, and so owners get to do this, and the players might, in their minds, be persuaded by the leverage that the owners are using, but it doesn't seem that way so far. So if players are able to hold fast through late January or even February, the advantage will shift to the players in the negotiating process. Now, obviously, professional athletes, let me just get this, address this elephant in the room. Professional athletes obviously make a lot more money than, let's say, workers for Nabisco. Those workers are also striking. The ramifications for them have been pretty brutal. But when we look at these athletes, what I really want you guys to focus on is the parallel dynamics, because the dynamics are the same. You really have this issue of the owners versus the workers, the capitalists versus labor. And you see that in professional sports as well. So what is this labor dispute really about? As I mentioned, the collective bargaining agreement has expired. And what the owners want is a continuation. They want the status quo to remain. Whereas the players are like, yo, we've noticed our pay drop considerably while revenue has actually gone up for MLB. What's up with that? We want to change the way these agreements are signed, and moving forward, we want to make sure that there's something that's far more fair and equitable for the players. So we have some details on this in the next video. Listen to it, and then I'll help decode a few elements of it.
Well, the player salaries over the last 4 or 5 years have actually declined by 4 or 5%. And at the same time, franchise values, sponsorship revenue, TV revenue has gone up. So I think they probably want to recalibrate that situation. What's taken place actually, Scarlett, is that the owners have really kind of manipulated the structure of the payment to young players, meaning the transition from minor league to Major League Baseball and the restrictive elements of that process. And they've actually been able to bring the cost down. That plus analytics and being more efficient in spending and targeting players has resulted for young players a real decrease. Of course, you're hearing about all these big deals with the veteran players. They're being paid well. Where the problem is with the young to middle players. It is stunning that the actual revenues for players have gone down over the last 4 or 5 years, and the numbers have really gone up for the owners. So I really do think an average person looking on saying, hey, if the owners are making more, the franchises are making more, the players should actually make more. So it really does look from the outside looking in that an adjustment, a more equitable adjustment needs to be made.
And look, I agree with that. There is no baseball without the baseball players. And we're not talking about the high, and again, you hear about the high paid contracts, but we're really talking about the younger players that are expected to play more games, they're paid far less, and at the same time, they're noticing that these clubs are raking in the dough because they have various revenue streams, diversified revenue streams in order to make this happen. So we're not just talking about ticket sales here, okay? We're talking about licensing, we're talking about other ways of making money. And as we've noticed in the overall economy, that wealth doesn't end up trickling down to the very players that we're talking about. Let's watch.
Before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, Major League Baseball was making money like never before. In 2019, league revenues totaled $10.7 billion, according to Forbes, marking the 17th consecutive year of record revenues for the game's owners, all of whom, it's worth noting, have seen the value of their franchises increase exponentially in recent years too. So that financial growth has to have trickled down to the players, right? Wrong. According to the Associated Press, the average player salary has actually dropped more than 6% since the start of the 2017 season, while the median salary has plummeted a whopping 30% since the start of the 2015 campaign. In fact, while many fans tend to view these labor disputes as billionaires versus millionaires, nearly 2/3 of the players on last year's opening day rosters had salaries under $1 million.
And if you pay attention to the graphic that was flashed at the end of that video, not only do 2/3 of the players make less than $1 million, 35% make less than $600,000. Now again, we're talking about huge chunks of money. I don't make $600,000 a year, right? That's a lot of money. But the longevity of a professional athlete's career is incredibly short. And remember, they're the players, they're the ones who are generating the revenue. And it looks as though the clubs, the owners, are just taking in a massive portion of that revenue for themselves and not sharing it with the players. That's the issue at hand, right? And there's also a lack of transparency. The clubs refuse to be transparent about the financial situation of the clubs, and the players are like, well, it's really hard for us to know if you're treating us fairly or paying us fairly if you refuse to be transparent about the financials. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the longevity of players because it's not as if they have lengthy careers. It's not like they play baseball until they retire at 65. That's not how it works, obviously. But how long is the average baseball player's career? Well, a rookie position player can expect to play 5.6 years. 1 in 5 position players will have only a single year career. And at every point of a player's career, the chance of exiting is at least 11%. Remember, they can get injured at any time, and the injury could even be a career-ending injury. Position players who start younger and begin their career in more recent decades all have longer and more stable careers. Nevertheless, baseball careers are not compressed versions of normal careers, but are substantially skewed toward early exit. So in other words, players do have a far shorter period of time to earn money, build a nest egg, to basically take care of themselves and their families for the rest of their lives. Now, considering that the MLB is raking in some big bucks, which again would not be possible without the players, owners should be sharing a larger piece of that pie with the players. That's the big argument here. Now, what else are the players taking a stand on? Well, according to the New York Times, players feel that too many teams are receiving tens of millions in revenue sharing from their counterparts, yet purposefully aren't competing for playoff spots. So this was a complicated element of the debate that I didn't really understand, because you would think that the teams would want to be as competitive as possible. But when you're basing the sport off of this business model that seeks to increase profits for the owners, they're gonna want to do what? They're gonna want to cut costs, including costs associated with the players. And so what they're noticing, what the players are noticing, is that the money is not being invested in, let's say, drafting players that are gonna give them a competitive advantage, instead of paying for, let's say, veteran players who might help them win some playoff spots. Yes, playoff spots. What they're doing instead is they're paying for players that are cheaper. Another thing that's interesting is when they share the pie, there's a minimum amount that is shared through the revenue sharing agreement. So if you're a team that isn't really performing well, you're still gonna get a minimum amount of money from that pie. And the argument here is that it's unfair, right? Because it's an anti-competitive provision that's included in the now expired collective bargaining agreement. So I hope I explained that correctly, or did so in a way that articulates what's really going on. So essentially the players are arguing that there are certain anti-competitive incentives within the current collective bargaining agreement, and they want to do something about it. This next video explains it in a little more detail.
Today, instead of paying up for veteran studs, many teams would rather take their chances with some unestablished youngsters. After all, the current CBA allows teams to pay players the league minimum for their first 3 seasons in the majors, and their salaries are capped by the arbitration process for the next 3. And of course, with those perverse incentives, many teams are content to just flat out tank. In fact, super agent Scott Boras recently characterized the current state of baseball as a race to the bottom.
We've got problems, and we don't ever want a system that rewards being a lesser team. We want a system that always rewards being the better team.
With so many teams tanking or just generally avoiding veteran talent in the name of cost effectiveness, you're left with an increasingly disgruntled group of players who have watched their earnings drop off, while the game's owners have gotten richer and richer thanks to the lucrative broadcast deals and corporate sponsorships.
Yeah, what that guy said. He said it way better than I did. So I'm glad I chose that video, because it's a good explanation of why the players are so frustrated, especially if you're a player for one of these teams, one of these clubs that is very clearly not doing what it takes to be competitive, to win, make your way to the playoffs. Players want to win, clearly they want to win. And so, look, the dynamics here are just so similar to what we're seeing in other workplaces. If you use this kind of business model, and this is the business model that prevails in almost every company, there's gonna be this concentration of wealth at the top. And the workers, yes, while they might be better paid workers in the case of professional athletes than other workers, end up getting a smaller piece of the pie, even though they're the ones who are generating the revenue in the first place, right? And because of this interest in increasing profitability, in concentrating that wealth at the very top, less of that money that's earned by the players gets invested into the players. That's what the players are frustrated about. That's what they're angry about. And that's the reason why they refuse to continue on with the status quo. They wanted better because they've earned it. And so I'm actually proud of the players for sticking to their guns here. It is a difficult situation because, as I explained earlier, you have the owners who have the advantage considering where we are in the season, right? In the preseason, I guess you could say. But this is not the first time there was a work stoppage for the MLB. The last time that that happened was in the 90s with a 232-day work stoppage that actually ended up canceling the 1994 World Series. And I guarantee the owners do not want to see that happen again. The viewership for the MLB was destroyed for a long period of time after that work stoppage. The owners, by the way, of the Chicago White Sox were pushing for a salary cap on the players at the time. Again, this is back in the 1990s. The players went on strike as a result of that. And then the owners decided to unilaterally install salary caps on their own. But get this, then a district court judge, Sonia Sotomayor, ruled against the owners, which kickstarted a shortened 1995 season. But as the Washington Post reports, owners continue to manipulate players' service time, by which young stars have their free agency delayed, all the while by making rosters younger or cheaper. And that's the other issue here. The players want to be released from this service time earlier so they can actually take advantage of their youth and the peak of their athletic careers to make the money that they deserve to make as free agents, right? But the owners want to lock them down in these service agreements that last longer than they should. So we'll see where this goes. Definitely check out Ricky Strum and all of his sports reporting on this. I'm sure that he's on this. It's a fascinating story, and I love an opportunity to talk about something labor related in an area that I am not an expert in, and that's certainly sports. Anyway, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, John Iadarola will join me for some, at first, disastrous news, but I promise you some crazy fun news later in the show as well. We'll see you for the second hour.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in it.
Yay, Crunch Berries!
And I was like, ooh, it's a fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, I don't know, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years, believing that it was actual berries. Yeah. She's like, these aren't real berries at all. Yeah. I'm like, I got news for you. Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really, the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you got to force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Iadarola. This is gonna be a big one.
What Donald Trump has done as president has cut taxes for the wealthy and made life better for rich people. But he's made life worse for poor people.
We're making America great again by throwing more money at the military to destroy other countries because that makes us great instead of investing it in ourselves.
That it's Donald Trump and it's Stephen Miller The choosing is based on wanting to create cruel and inhumane conditions to scare other people away from ever coming to the United States.
The opportunity to make money off of tragedy is the American way.
There's only one place to put garbage people: in the trash.
We've never had so much access to so much information with so little idea of what the hell is going on.
What does enforcing our borders have to do with traumatizing children? Absolutely nothing.
I think a sane person could say the current situation we have right now is radical. But what we're doing is literally making the world more like hell. That's a warning sign.
ShopTYT.com now has books. One of them is Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People. That's a saying that AOC said, they've got money, we've got people. It's the best tracing of the AOC victory I've seen anywhere. It's the most accurate, and it's got great details. The book actually goes all the way back to Jesse Jackson and how he's the original Bernie Sanders. If you want to know how we're going to win going forward, those lessons are super important, and they're in Ryan's book. So check it out right now at ShopTYT.com. We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country, so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Is John Iadarola here?
I think there's a 100% chance of John Iadarola.
John Iadarola is here. Everyone loves John. I love John. You're the best, John.
It's okay.
Thank you for joining us. We've got
any Wednesday.
We've got some fun to get to later in the show.
Do we?
Yeah, we do. You read the stories.
I did actually.
Yeah, you did.
Some of us do.
Yeah, I know. Actually, luckily, the people who typically wouldn't are no longer here. Jimmy Dore. But we've got a lot
Jake's off for the day.
But later in the show, we're gonna give you an example, probably the craziest example of revisionist history. In the bonus episode today, a woman experiencing a midlife crisis commits fraud. But is she the bad guy? We're gonna ask the people.
Or is she an American hero?
Or is she an American hero?
Or both.
So if you're not a member, you can become one by going to tyt.com/join. Also today, just a quick programming note, Happy Half Hour airs after our bonus episode at twitch.tv/tyt, where Brett Ehrlich will in fact have a bracket today, a very fun one. What's the best Christmas song?
Ooh, okay. And similarly, on next Monday, every Monday we do a top 10 list. Francesca and I, for our tier 2 and tier 3 members on YouTube, we're gonna be doing our top 10 favorite Christmas movies.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, get a little in the mood for the holiday.
Is Home Alone 1 considered a Christmas movie?
It would definitely be a Christmas movie.
Yeah. I watch it every year.
Oh, is that
Christmas
one?
Time.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a tradition.
Every Thanksgiving I watch Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Nice.
So yeah, and I did this year. Okay, we'll see if any of these make it on the list.
All right, sounds good. Well, let's unfortunately move away from fun, cheery news or topics and talk about the protection of medical disinformation in Tennessee. The Tennessee Medical Licensing Board was threatened to the point where it finally decided to delete a policy opposing coronavirus misinformation from its website. This followed a powerful conservative lawmaker threatening them. I'll give you those details in just a second. But the policy, unanimously adopted by the Board of Medical Examiners in September, establishes that doctors who spread demonstrably untrue information about COVID-19 vaccines could have their licenses suspended or potentially revoked.
Seems reasonable.
That is the most rational policy imaginable. You want to ensure that during a global pandemic, where hundreds of thousands of Americans have already died, you prevent the spread of misinformation. But not so fast. There are quite a few of right-wingers in this country who would love to continue disseminating false information and want to protect that. So members voted 7-3, by the way, to delete, but not rescind the policy. The policy, unanimously adopted by the Board of Medical Examiners in September, establishes that doctors who spread demonstrably untrue information about COVID-19 vaccines could have their licenses suspended or potentially revoked. Now, members voted 7-3 to delete, but not rescind the policy. I just want to really emphasize that. What does that mean?
I've been wondering.
So the board claims, yeah, I mean, we deleted it from the website, but it doesn't mean the policy just goes away. We didn't rescind it, the policy still exists. Except the individual who threatened them over that policy says, no, deleting it from the website means that it has been rescinded. I'll get back to that in just a second. Now, who's the person who threatened them? Well, it is a lawmaker, a conservative lawmaker, who apparently loves the idea of people getting sick and dying from COVID. Now, let's get to the Chairman Reagan, his name is.
He's the guy in favor of more misinformation.
But what is going on with my graphics here? All right, so here's what the threat is. So there was a lawmaker who said, basically, if you keep this on the books, what we'll do is we'll just completely dissolve. We'll completely dissolve this board. It'll no longer exist.
During a public health crisis?
During a public health crisis. That's what the threat was, okay? And so here's what happened. Jennifer Putnam, who's actually an attorney who works with the board, let them know, hey, Representative Reagan is saying, and yes, his last name is Reagan. Representative Reagan has done this in the past and he's followed through on it. And we need to be super careful because he will in fact dissolve this board if we keep this policy in place. In fact, here's her statement. Chairman Reagan also made clear he has no qualms about moving forward with dissolving the BME, that's the medical board, and reconstituting it with new members. He has in fact done this with another state agency, so it is not a hollow threat. And by the way, he said in a joint government he said the Joint Government Operations Committee has the authority to very seriously recommend dissolution, and he sets the agenda for the committee. So he says that he'll follow through with the threat, but claims that he can't unilaterally do it. It's just he can do it with the help of his committee. So basically, they got rid of a policy that's meant to protect people because they got threatened.
But they say they didn't.
But they say they didn't.
So I don't understand why they seem to be confused about what makes something a rule or not. If it is literally just having it on a web page, then I don't think that necessarily is going to be able to be used to take away their license. Do they not have an actual printed out set of their rules, guidelines, regulations, anything like that? It's just whatever happens to be on the website at any given moment. If the website goes down, are there just no rules? It's chaos all of a sudden? And then of course, look, that's the minor point. The bigger point is that the side that says that we've politicized COVID is always exerting as much political influence as they can over this process. Not to guarantee better public health outcomes in terms of lower case counts and deaths and those sorts of things, but just making sure that the people that they've convinced that this isn't something you need to take seriously. You don't need to get vaccinated. You can just take whatever medicines just hanging around. That those people's feelings aren't hurt, and that is at the end of the day what this is about. The doctors want to be able to continue to spread misinformation that they can't demonstrate with actual studies, and we're not allowed to have higher standards for doctors administering care to people who might be getting sick with COVID than we do randos online giving the same misinformation on YouTube channels.
I don't know what you're talking about, John. We have the best healthcare in America, and that healthcare has helped to not prevent the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans during the coronavirus pandemic. And
see,
also,
I don't know if you're allowed to say that because I don't know if it's really a rule. Can you spread misinformation that's demonstrably untrue, or can you not? Because it just did.
Right. So as I mentioned, right. So the board says no. We did not rescind the policy. We just deleted it from the website. Representative John Reagan, the one who threatened the board, says no, it's absolutely rescinded. So the board was urged to vote specifically on whether or not they want to rescind the policy. And the board's like, no, we're not gonna do that. Because they're terrified. They're terrified of this lawmaker who has threatened them and threatened their jobs. That's how politics works in this country. You've got one side that's vicious and will stop at nothing to destroy you and destroy your career. And then you've got the other side that refuses to fight. And and by the way, I don't know what the political makeup of this medical board is, but I guarantee you they're terrified of losing their jobs.
Yeah.
Which is why they refuse to even vote on whether or not they're gonna rescind the policy in the first place. But like, guys, they want the misinformation out there because the misinformation helps them, create this
continue the COVID sort of centered culture war that we're in.
Not only the culture war, but it helps them to push people to be a lot more relaxed about this pandemic that's still killing a lot of people. And it's just frustrating because these are the people who are like, no censorship, we believe in freedom, except we don't. We don't when it comes to messaging that we disagree with.
Yeah, it's just cancel culture. And again, as I've always said, that is why we have to fight back against those sorts of constructs because they're just used for partisan ends.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about my favorite people, Republicans.
Two types of members of Congress. There's performance artists, and there's legislators. Now the performance artists are the ones that get all the attention. They're the ones you think are more conservative because they know how to say slogans real well. They know how to recite the lines that they know that our voters want to hear.
That was Texas Republican Representative Dan Crenshaw, and he was not talking about Democratic lawmakers here. He was talking about members of his own party, those he wants to differentiate himself with, those who say things that are even more insane than what you typically hear from so-called moderate Republicans like Crenshaw himself. He's referring to the Matt Gaetzes, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the loonier side of the Republican Party, if you could believe there is a loonier side. Now, that was at a campaign event in Texas. Crenshaw further accused members of the House Freedom Caucus specifically of not voting for many of Trump's agenda items when he was in office. Let's watch.
Let me tell you guys something. In the first 2 years of Trump's presidency, when Republicans were in control, when every single time we were voting on Donald Trump's agenda, who do you think was at the top of that list voting with Trump, and who do you think was at the bottom? A lot of names you would recognize were at the bottom of that list. A lot of names you would recognize are at the top of that list. Number 2 is probably going to make you cringe a little bit. It's Adam Kinzinger. Voted with Trump almost 99%. He was number 2. And who's at the bottom? Everybody in the Freedom Caucus. All of them. What you hear so often is not true. It's not true. We have grifters in our midst. Not here, not like in this room, that's not what I mean. I mean in the conservative movement. Lie after lie after lie.
I'm just so fascinated with this ongoing and deepening divide within the Republican Party, where the so-called moderates are trying to kind of dispose of the more insane elements of their party. But I don't know if they can, right? So he's specifically referring to members of the House Freedom Caucus. He also mentioned Adam Kinzinger voting along with Trump most of the time because Kinzinger happens to be one of the biggest Trump critics out there. So he's really trying to make a point about how, listen, the people who align themselves with Trump the most don't necessarily vote in favor of what Trump was trying to do, whereas Trump's biggest critics did go along with what Trump wanted to do. I don't know if that speaks so well of Kinzinger, but anyway, go ahead.
There's a couple issues with it.
Yeah.
First of all, the metric he's using is voting with Trump. What did Trump want to do? Like, what does that even?
Cut taxes.
Okay, so they did that. That's true. Other than that, what? It's not like Trump has this wide range of issues, and he really worked hard week after week to get it through, and he had a few wins, but a lot of losses. What did he want to do? Like he wanted to repeal the ACA, and he wanted to cut taxes. And then he mostly just bummed around. So I don't know, I just don't think that that's necessarily the best metric to use. I also think, while I don't disagree with him, that there are people in the Republican Party that are just good at telling people what they want to hear, and that's true of everywhere in America. The grifters are all around us. It is a little bit rich that he's talking about people being performative, when, as far as I know, he's the only person in the House that made an action video of him jumping out of a plane as like a special forces commando or something. And again, what is he trying to do?
Yeah.
Maybe there are things. Look, I'm not saying that I'm an expert on Dan Crenshaw or anything, but like the range of serious to completely unserious Republican, I don't think is nearly as broad as he's making it out to be.
Right.
It's just some are a little bit more dead set on business deregulation and tax cuts, and the rest will probably go along with that, but mostly make Islamophobic and anti-Semitic comments every couple of weeks.
No, you make so many great points, because fact of the matter is, substantively speaking, there really is no difference. The only difference that we see is the theatrics, right? The posturing. And to be sure, the theatrics are different with the House Freedom Caucus. And the House Freedom Caucus does consider itself further to the right compared to the rest of the Republican Party. But in terms of actual policy and how that's carried out, there really is no difference between Republican lawmakers. Again, it's all about the cover of the book, but it's not really about the substance in the pages. So Crenshaw did clarify. He said that his criticism was directed at everybody in the Freedom Caucus, all of them, and did not single out any specific GOP lawmaker. If you're curious, well, who's in the House Freedom Caucus? It includes Representatives Mo Brooks, who is running for the Senate. So help us. Matt Gaetz from Florida, Louis Gohmert from Texas, Paul Gosar from Arizona, Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, although she was not in office during the Trump administration. The caucus is currently led by Representative Andy Biggs, who will be replaced as chairman by Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania next month. And the House Freedom Caucus was formed back in 2015 by a group of Republicans frustrated with their party's leaders for not being extreme enough and for striking deals. Believe it or not, they think that the overall Republican Party was too friendly to Obama during the Obama administration. It's
I'm
insane.
Sure there are some things, I don't even know what.
Now look, in terms of the theatrics, I do agree with Crenshaw. And we have a perfect example to share with you. So Matt Gaetz decided to hold some sort of goofy press conference, which honestly I could only laugh at, but maybe you have a different take. Let's watch how that all went down.
We are going to take power after this next election. And when we do, it's not going to be the days of Paul Ryan and Trey Gowdy and no real oversight and no real subpoenas. It's going to be the days of Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Dr. Gosar and myself.
Let's not forget that that guy is still under a federal investigation for potentially sex trafficking a minor.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I assume that he'll probably have some subpoenas for that. I mean, this is a new day after all. Marjorie Greene, as we know, is very serious about criminality, so she's gonna be looking into that. Yeah, he has his team, he's doubling down on it. And I think that out of that group, while he is among the more reprehensible, I also think he's at least minimally intelligent. He knows that these aren't serious people, but he also understands that the people who are financially backing him and all the rest of them don't care. They're not interested in a government that works. What better way to just hold on to their gains and stop any threat to the position they're in economically than just getting a bunch of chuckleheads elected and then wasting a bunch of time with Marjorie Greene issuing subpoenas to find out, who's funding the Jewish space lasers, and it's just going to be conspiracy theories for a few years. And there's going to be insane targeting of Democrats, which they're promising they'll do, and I'm sure they will. They'll have nothing, but we're gonna have to sit through a bunch of nonsense, and he doesn't care about that. Dan Crenshaw, I think, is a little bit aggrieved because in theory, he'd probably like a little bit of their time and attention over the next few years to be put into moving towards the next round of tax cuts. And maybe there won't be as much oxygen in the room if they're focused on, like, honestly, looking into Benghazi again for a couple of years or something like that.
Yeah, no, you make a great point. I also would like to commend you on your bold efforts in not saying Marjorie Taylor Greene's middle name. I'm gonna go in that direction. Why does everyone just say her middle name? We don't need to say her middle name.
So here's the thing. Look, I generally think that if a person wants to be called something, you should extend regular human decency and do that.
Right.
She has definitely taken herself out of the range of regular human decency, but much more importantly, it isn't what she called herself just a couple of years ago. It is so transparent that she only did it because of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. That's it. And I'm not gonna take part in her little personal branding thing. In her, I almost said it. Her crazy videos just a couple of years ago, she was like, I'm Marjorie Greene. That's how she introduced herself. Well, Marjorie Greene, that's what I'm gonna call you. I understand you're jealous of AOC. I have some jealous of her career success and everything too, but I'm not John Matthew Idarola. I'm still just John.
Oh, John Matthew Idarola. Can I call you John
Okay,
Matthew?
maybe I will be.
It's a good name, it's a good name. All right, I love it. A little insight into John's decision making here. I think it's a good one. Anyway, we gotta take a break. When we come back, we've got more news for you, including an insane story about the police department in Torrance, California. There is a full-blown investigation into their conduct. We'll give you the details on that and more when we return. I'm so happy that I'm getting some comments in regard to my MLB segment because I've pitched that story in other places, and there's a fear that since we're talking about professional athletes, there won't be a lot of sympathy for the players because people tend to think they're all like multimillionaires, but that's not the case. So Trigger Incarnate, thank you for writing this in. Only about half of MLB players make the type of money necessary to help them hold out through the strike. The rest, especially the lower 25%, make what can be identified as an upper middle class salary. So holding out for them is not going to be an easy thing. That's important context, and I thank you for sharing it with us. Mickey C, the silver-haired dragon, writes in and says, workers in a warehouse, factory, etc., can easily be replaced. MLB has to realize that top baseball players aren't in a long line waiting to be hired. I would think that players would have the huge advantage. By the way, I know this from not personal experience, but from my husband's personal experience. The minors are brutal. They make nothing in the minors, nothing. I mean, they make less than minimum wage. I think recently there were negotiations that helped to increase the pay for the minor leagues, but they don't really feed you. The food that they provide is literally PBJs, like all day, every day.
Not every day.
Which I like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, like maybe twice a year, but like, yeah.
Yes, you're right. Like it's easy to just think of them as all multimillionaires. The only thing is though, if this does go long enough and the MLB does want to play hardball, they could set up like a second league of their own situation. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
Watch that.
By the way, that Manfred guy is not nice. He's very, very, like just the way, like his demeanor.
I saw your tweets, yeah.
Yeah,
you've moved beyond my personal knowledge of this story, but yes, I do. I get the general idea, the gist.
All right, Colorado Blue Blazer Regular says, don't forget MLB, actually every pro sport. Franchises routinely threaten communities to get a publicly financed stadium where they get all the revenue or else.
Yep.
Trey Doris says, Anna, thank you. As always, the receipt queen is always prepared and ready. Thank you so much. And Occam's Taser says, if is Crenshaw self-aware enough to know he falls into the pageantry camp? I mean, that's the point that John made. He gave a perfect example. Still alive in our super chats says, was wondering what you guys think of Kellogg's firing all the strikers after they rejected their latest offer. Pretty disgusting. So they had scabs working there as the strike was going on, and we just learned that they have decided to permanently hire the scabs after the workers rejected the offer. But I think it's a perfect example of how much is on the line for the workers when they do decide to strike. It's not an easy process. And yes, they might have a little bit of protection, a little bit of wiggle room provided by the union, but there is a lot on the line. And unfortunately, the Kellogg's workers experienced this. Maybe we'll do a story on this more in depth later. But yeah, that's what I think about it. Anna Kasparian and John Iadarola with you. We've got a ton of super chats, so I want to read a few of them. Starting with LJ Wombology, who says, I got a pint of Netflix and chill for Ice Cream Wednesday.
Nice.
Ice cream.
It happened.
They are both labor and product and scat. Oh, sorry, I skipped the comment. But this first hour is going to make me eat the whole thing for emotional support.
Oh, geez.
I hope you didn't do that. Molly Mall says, hey, Anna, when you start your weed channel, I have a great topic. Is an ice cream sandwich just a frozen Oreo? No.
No.
No. We don't even have to debate it. I think it's, you know.
I don't know, maybe you could see the nuances if you were high. You're so absolutist sober.
All right, the next story is a serious one, but it's an important one to share with you guys. So let's discuss what's happening in Torrance, California. All right. Dozens of leaked text messages revealed ongoing racist, xenophobic, sexist, and homophobic messages traded by current and former police officers in Torrance, California. In fact, the messages are so awful that there is now a full-blown investigation into the police department by California's Attorney General. We'll give you details on that in just a second, but you must be wondering, well, how bad were they? What was included in these text messages? Was it innuendo? No, it was pretty brazen. The caption read, okay, so in one picture that was exchanged in these messages, there were several black men who were depicted as being lynched. Okay, so we're already talking about some pretty hideous behavior. And the caption read, hanging with the homies. Another photo asked what someone should do if their girlfriend was having an affair with a black man. The answer, according to the caption, was to break a taillight on his car so the police will stop him and shoot him. They're not holding back at all.
You know, cops seem to understand cops at least.
They're sharing these text messages with one another. Like, it is being documented, okay? So there's evidence of this. It just keeps getting worse. Officers called black men savages and several variations of the N-word. The officers also shared instructions on how to tie a noose and a picture of a stuffed animal being lynched inside Torrance's police headquarters, according to the documents. You know, the word savages reminded me of a pretty epic rant that Cenk went on fairly recently on the show. And I want to reshare that rant with you because it's important to remind people who the real savages are.
When they attack black people after they've been murdered, when they did absolutely nothing wrong, you're pushing us to the limit. And what do I mean by that? You're asking us to talk about history, the history of the South. This is in Georgia. What happened in Georgia? There were savages in Georgia. It was the ancestors of the white right-wingers. They were absolute savages. They murdered people, they lynched people, they raped people, they enslaved people. They took babies from their mothers and sold them as property. You want to talk about savages?
Your ancestors were the biggest savages the world has ever seen. So don't you dare call a black man a savage after you murdered him. Don't you dare do that. I'm so sick of African Americans being called violent when the world's worst violence was done to them, not by them, to them, not by them. For God's sake, you want to do racist stereotypes? If it fit anywhere, and it doesn't, but if it fit anywhere, it would certainly fit white right-wingers in the South, who has hundreds of years of history of being savages. Savages.
So John,
actually, I think I'll talk right now.
Okay, actually, you should.
No, everything he was saying was really good.
Yeah.
But I did notice that. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. No, it was great points, indisputable points.
Who's salty today? Is it me or is it you?
I'm trying to take a little bit of the salt.
All
No,
right,
indisputable points. Totally true. I mean, the only thing I guess to add is that in this case, it's California. It's not just Georgia. It's not just the South. That may be where some of the worst of the violence happened, but California, Southern California, hardly strangers to police violence. So it would be one thing if there's no demonstrated like police brutality issues or race-based police brutality issues in Southern California, and you saw this stuff and you thought, well, oh my God, wait, maybe behind the scenes it might be having some effect in terms of bias. But when it's accompanied by constant actual brutality and murders, well, then we don't have to engage in hypotheticals. They'll say it's just jokes. It's not just jokes. No. It's never just been jokes. Your people act on it.
How do you joke about lynching? How do you joke about that?
Yeah.
I mean,
well, and
that's
how does the thread
behavior?
How does this exist? Since at most you only ever have a bad apple in one of these places. He sends out the first meme. Nobody responds to it. That should be the end of the thing. Except it's not, because it's not just a bad apple. It is a culture of dehumanizing, hateful behavior and beliefs.
Now, if you believe that this is only reserved toward African Americans, black members of the community, you would be wrong. This group of cops very clearly has hatred for various groups of people, and I want to give you some examples of that. They joked about gassing Jewish people, assaulting members of the LGBTQ community, using violence against suspects, and lying during an investigation into a police shooting, according to district attorneys, according to the district attorney's office. Now, the Attorney General in California, Rob Bonta, is launching an investigation into this. He announced that just today in a press conference. And the state's Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Enforcement Division, and the Division of Law Enforcement will examine evidence and talk to community members about this whole situation. And I mean, think about it. These are individuals, these are supposed to be public servants who are paid with the community's tax resources to protect and serve. And how can you rely on or trust these individuals to protect and serve members of the community? Huge group of, huge group of people. I mean, it's everyone basically that isn't white. How are you gonna expect them to protect these communities when they have so much hatred for them? By the way, some of them had previously been caught engaging in hate crimes. Wow, what a shocker. So for instance, former officers Cody Weldon and Christopher Tomsick were charged in August with conspiracy and vandalism for allegedly spray painting a swastika inside a vehicle. And look, there is a real cost to this. It's injustice all around. Because since these cops were involved in the prosecution of various members of the community, now those cases need to be questioned. They need to be retried. So for instance, currently no officers face criminal charges in direct relation to the text messages, but at least 85 criminal cases involving the officers have been dismissed. They've been dismissed, okay? Including 35 county felony cases as of mid-November and an additional 50 city cases. Alarmingly, the officers were listed as potential witnesses in nearly 1,400 cases in the last decade, according to the district attorney's records the Los Angeles Times obtained through a public records request.
Yeah.
Well, thankfully, it's just jokes. It would never influence what they do in a case, even when the joke is about them literally lying to cover up crimes. It wouldn't possibly have an effect on anyone. And anyway, you were implying that they were doing hate crimes. I just heard on Tucker Carlson last week that hate crimes don't exist. It's a stupid concept. Nobody knows what it means. And so presumably spray painting swastikas, not especially concerning over and above any other spray painting. According to Tucker Carlson, there's hate crimes, it's just spray painting. It's the same as any other spray painting. Anti-Semitic crimes don't matter according to Tucker Carlson.
By the way, according to Tucker Carlson and most right-wingers in this country.
Yeah, they don't believe that any of this exists.
It goes further than that. It is offensive. It is offensive to even cover this story because it hurts the precious feelings of white Americans.
Yeah, and
did it hurt their feelings to draw attention to the fact that people who are supposed to protect and serve are clowning around about lynchings and gassing Jewish people? Does that hurt your feelings?
Can you imagine, like we take all of this, they don't care, they'll never cover it. Tucker Carlson doesn't have, one atom of a scrotum to actually address these sorts of issues, the obvious systemic racism in this. Can you imagine if one black DA texted another black DA about wanting to slap a cracker or something? That would be it on Fox News for a solid week, maybe a month. They'd be talking about it for literally years, and they would believe that not only cancels out all of this, all of these cops across all of the years and all that, but they would still maintain that this doesn't matter. But if anything anti-white, like they invent supposed anti-white animus amongst people, but they would take that incredibly serious. And there are definitely hate crimes targeting white people, but having literally the people who are the last line of will there be justice for people living in one of the most densely populated parts of America. No, it doesn't matter if they believe all these things. If they say anti-Semitic stuff, they joke about wanting to lynch people, it doesn't matter, you shouldn't be concerned about it. And they can do their little investigation. What are they gonna do? Like, let's say they get rid of every cop that sent one of these text messages, which they won't. They won't do anything like that. Oh, good, then we'll just have the rest of them, and I'm sure they're cool. Like, who hears this story and thinks that we will get within 10 miles of justice in this? That in a year, we won't have just as systemically racist police departments in California as we did before this story was broken. It is systemic, it is baked into the DNA. And even if someone does decide to become a cop and is a good person, give it a couple of years being surrounded by this culture and see what comes out the other side.
Yep, and this is happening with the backdrop of violent crime increasing. I'm not talking about, smash and grabs. I'm talking about violent crime. Homicides are up all across the country, including in, Southern California. These are the people who are supposed to protect and serve. This is what they're up to. They're supposed to be fighting crime. This is what they're up to.
Yep.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we'll lighten things up a little bit, I promise. So stick around. We'll talk a little bit about a situation in which a person decided to smoke a tree. All right, we've got a lot of comments. Chaplain Fred writes in and says, Anna Salt, thank you for always being so professional. But I was wondering if you're going to talk about the Karen who got upset for toddlers driving a Hot Wheels car without a license.
What? That can't be real.
I had not seen that story, Karen. So we will not be discussing it today, at least. But I don't know, maybe if super producer Aishwarya can find that video and have it for the post game.
I see one, it seems like it's from June 2020. It's still the fact that it exists is terrible. It's on TMZ.
It sounds fun. R. Stone says Tennessee finally got rid of child marriage in 2018, but taking away protections against COVID vaccine misinformation while still in a pandemic is okay. Priorities. I mean, that's just who they are. Lars writes in and says, people at IKEA in Sweden got a nice Christmas gift this year. All employees were rewarded with an extra monthly salary of 80% as a thanks for the hard work during the pandemic. Some companies actually care about their employees. Gives me some hope.
That's nice.
IKEA. I have patronized their establishment before.
I have several times.
Yeah.
You know what? I think we should do that in America. That 80% thing, extra bonus. And if not America, at least TYT. We should do that at TYT.
Put your money where your mouth is. All right. Rex Mundy in our member section says, I'm sorry, there are people who don't eat the entire Ben & Jerry's pint in a single sitting. Do you even self-care, bro?
Cenk calls those people savages, actually. They like put the top back on and put it in a fridge or a freezer. I don't even know which you do. Cabinet?
If I allow myself to buy a pint of any kind of ice cream, it will last at least a week. I can't. I can't live with myself.
Brian Regan said that a serving size of ice cream is when the spoon hits the bottom and then you have to tear the side to lick the last little bit.
Let's just discuss though.
You tear it open.
Let's discuss the serving size for ice cream, right?
So stupid.
It's 4 servings allegedly in that pint. 4.
Yeah.
Okay, so that 280 to 320 calories per serving, multiply that by 4. And yes, I'm an expert at this because obviously I'm keeping track, but you know. All right, Isaac says, don't say anything about savagery without mentioning the likes of Derek Chauvin. Sarah Wolf says, the Gates press conference was like a modern day Three Stooges, Louis, Matt, and Margarine. It's hilarious. And the Dragon who says, Nee, while this is disturbing, it's not surprising. I'd imagine you'd have similar stories about just any other police department. Exactly. I mean, it's just, I think it's the most, I don't know about the most, but it's one of the worst examples, where they're just literally laughing about the worst atrocities that have happened to people. Lynchings, gassing Jewish people. It's absolutely hideous.
It's like the Border Patrol thing.
Yeah.
The OC pointed out.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we got to get back to the show. We'll see you there. Welcome back to TYT. Let's get right to our next story because as we know, the right wing is campaigning on revisionist history, and here's a great example of that. So, lawmakers in New Hampshire have proposed a bill banning teachers from teaching American history because some white people have their feelings hurt every time they hear about this country's past with things like slavery and, certain previous provisions in our Constitution that weren't so friendly to African Americans. And so what they want to do is prevent teaching history through an accurate lens, like so many other states, by the way, have already done. Now, there's an insane video involved in this story that I do not want you to miss. So please stick around until we at least get to that. But first, I got to give you some context. So first off, the people pushing for this bill are outright questioning the loyalty of teachers to the United States if they want to teach accurate US history. Lawmakers clashed this year over the issue of how teachers talk about race and racism in the classroom. Next year, they'll debate a bill titled An Act Relative to Teachers' Loyalty.
That sounds good.
An update of an obscure Cold War era law that bans educators from advocating for communism in schools.
Okay, they're making the comparisons to that period a little bit on the nose, perhaps?
On the nose, yes. So if you teach accurate US history as an educator, you will be blacklisted. This proposed legislation comes after you and questions your loyalty to the United States. Now, the updated version says this: no teacher shall advocate any doctrine or theory promoting a negative account or representation of the founding and history of the United States of America in New Hampshire public schools, which does not include the worldwide context of now outdated and discouraged practices. Such prohibition includes, but is not limited to, teaching that the United States was founded on racism. Now, Republican Erica Leon, who is a co-sponsor of this bill, was just asked about specific instances in the curriculum. Like, how do you teach certain things without going against what this proposed legislation entails? And get a load of how she handled the question.
If this became law, what would be the appropriate way for a teacher to address something like the 3/5 compromise in the Constitution, which basically invalidated the humanity of enslaved people who were black in America? I mean, that's a racist aspect of America's founding. Is that run afoul somehow to bring this up in the classroom?
Well, when you're bringing this up in the classroom, you should go back to some of the historical documents. The 3/5 compromise actually made it so that the slaveholding South didn't have more of a voice in Congress. They actually were worried that if for representation they counted each slave as a whole vote and a whole voter, that then there might be more slavery throughout the country, and that it would be unequal. It would be unequal because a viewpoint that was on its way out would be overrepresented. So the idea of saying that somebody is less than a human is abhorrent. It's terrible. It's something that we shouldn't do. They were trying to figure out how to have a representative democracy without having a toxic view take hold and overwhelm the rest of this new forming country.
I mean, it was meant to help the slaves, duh. You know, basically treat African Americans as if they're 3/5 human to help them. Okay, it's complete BS, of course, which I'll explain in a second, but John.
Yeah, there's also the cloak of, but don't worry about it. It was on its way out, and we're like totally moving on. Everybody was like, like totally didn't care about that anymore and didn't want slavery. That's why you need to lighten up. You're acting as if it was sort of baked in our DNA, but we were moving on. I mean, we'd only had hundreds of years of slavery and then decades under the United States of slavery. And under the example I'm giving, which is BS in a lot of different ways, but let's pretend that it's true. There are multiple states that are desperately trying to have more slavery, but we're supposed to believe that her explanation is a demonstration of how America had already long moved on from slavery, even though an entire region of the country was desperately trying to create more slaveholding states.
Yep.
So those people held power in multiple states and would use it to create more slavery, but there was nothing systemic about it, nothing baked into the systems of government. She doesn't understand what she's talking about, but even if it was an honest reflection of what was going on, it proves the opposite of what she's trying to demonstrate.
All right, so let's do something super naughty. You want to do something naughty? All right, let's teach a little history that's banned in some of these red states.
We're gonna be locked up.
Ooh, we're baddies, we're baddies. All right.
You and your free speech and your facts.
So let's talk about the history of the 3/5 compromise. What is it? Where did it come from? Well, in 1787, Constitutional Convention, the Constitutional Convention then addressed the appointment in the House of Representatives and the number of electoral votes each state would have in presidential elections based on a state's population, right? This is where the awful electoral system is kind of like being set up, and they're deciding on how much representation each state should have based on its population. So that's when the issue of non-voting African American slaves come up, right? And I say they're non-voting because they're not allowed to vote. And so what happens here? They had to determine the count of the slave population, again, which was considered legal property, so they couldn't vote. Part of what she says in that video, there's like a tiny, tiny sliver of truth, okay? So the North did worry a little bit that counting a slave as a whole person would give the South too much power. Now, but it puts states that permitted slavery in the position of arguing that enslaved people should count for more than 3/5 because they wanted the representation that came with that albeit without letting enslaved people be free or actually vote for that representation. States that did not permit slavery argued for less because they feared such representation would make the South too powerful, okay? The compromise eventually landed on 3/5. It is inhumane, it is disgusting, it is a dark—
It's anti-democratic, clearly.
Exactly, it is a dark part of our history, but it happened. It is part of our history that absolutely should be taught. But that doesn't mean the law was some milestone in abolishing slavery. She made it seem like it was a milestone in abolishing slavery, which makes it so abhorrent. Now, generally speaking, historians do not count this as anything amounting to anti-slavery. Indeed, the historian Saughton Lind wrote that the compromise sanctioned slavery more decidedly than any previous action at a national level, because while not technically codifying slavery into law, it acknowledged the difference between the free people and other persons. And by the way, the founders of the Constitution, like they knew how terrible slavery really was. Many of them had slaves themselves. So they didn't want to use the word slave in the Constitution. Instead, they would use other wording like other people, right? I'm sure that right-wingers don't want to learn that part of history either, but it's true.
And regardless, the institution continued for decades and decades and decades, and we had to have a war to stop it. So you cannot teach that and pretend this had nothing to do with American government or society or our economy. There was nothing structural or foundational or systemic about it. You cannot actually teach American history if that is the case. And I would argue that if this is how you want history to be taught, you may think that what you're doing is turning against people who are disloyal to America, but you by definition cannot be loyal to America if the America you want to teach about literally never existed. You're loyal to a ghost, to a figment of your imagination. It never existed in the real world.
Now, there's a second part of her interaction during this interview. I want to make sure you don't miss it, so let's watch.
It was rational, but it was also racist, though, right?
I mean, it's not a good thing to do. If you look at it, it was all slaves. So when you had indentured slaves that were coming over from Ireland, they also counted as 3/5. My family, the Indians, I'm part Cherokee, we were also counted as 3/5 within that. So it wasn't good, but when you look at what else was happening in the world at the time, you didn't have representative democracies.
That had everything.
Oh, you're part Cherokee.
That had everything. Maybe she is. Maybe.
John.
I've heard people say that before. Anyway, like the whole thing is nonsense. And even if in her example, some people were against it, and we should really grade on a curve. We should grade for the most racially liberal or whatever. They still try to do this, by the way. Mitch McConnell will go on the Senate floor and say, how could you say America's a racist country? We elected a black president. First of all, don't say we, because you had no part in that. You always are the ones standing against the things you will later use as proof that racism doesn't exist. And you do not evaluate a country that is a mixture of good and bad things just by whatever the best part is. If you have a bowl and you put pudding in it and poop in it, it's not, let's be optimistic, it's pudding. You're not eating it either way. And that's basically racially how America has been for its entire history. Yeah, some people are good, but we gotta teach about the poop too.
Just a few fact checks.
I should be a history teacher. I think we can all agree.
You should be a history teacher. You're very passionate. It's very good. Let's also continue on with our history lesson, because she said a lot of things in that answer that were incorrect. She later apologized for her errors, but wants to move forward with the legislation, because of course she does. So first of all, the text of the law made it very clear that indentured servants were not to be counted as whole people. Okay. Also, Native Americans weren't counted at all. So let's be clear about that.
Why in her example is racism against Native people? Well, let's just, I mean, it wasn't just black. I mean, it was also, that's also racism. That's yet more racism that you're describing.
Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution, by the way, states representatives and direct taxes shall be appointed among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed 3/5 of all other persons. That's what it said.
Sounds progressive to me.
Super progressive. But don't teach about that. Don't teach about that. So in the end, because of backlash, she ended up apologizing, but wants to move forward with pushing for this bill. She says, thanks to all that pointed out my errors. That is how we learn. HB 1255 will not stop discussion in the classroom. It prevents a teacher from advocating one viewpoint. Teach how to think, not what to think.
That is literally what they are doing. Teachers have always been able to discuss things.
You're questioning the loyalty of teachers to America just by the very nature of them doing their jobs appropriately and accurately.
Yeah.
Like, spare me the BS spin. No one's buying it. And look, is it any shocker that the people pushing for the erasure of our history, of our story, are complete morons when it comes to our history?
And don't understand it. And well, maybe they don't have time to actually learn it because they're spending all their time talking about how the left is too censorious and wants cancel culture.
They're too busy, nursing their hurt feelings and using this as part of their manufactured culture war to distract voters, really. I mean, there's a hateful element to it. There's no question about that. There are definitely people in this country who do get their feelings hurt just by the very nature of what our real history is. But at the end of the day, the reason why politicians are like laser focused on this issue is because it makes it appear as though they're representing the best interests of their constituents while doing absolutely nothing to improve their lives. That's what this is really about. They're disgusting human beings. They have really no right, in my opinion, to be in these positions of power.
Agreed.
Bonus episode is next. We'll see you guys there.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. You know, they'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed, and I love it.
Our TYT audience has been building this show and this network with us for 20 years. Now we're expanding and connecting our audience around the world in even more exciting and powerful ways. Look, I don't want you to miss another petition, poll, community conversation, or TYT segment. Connect with informed, passionate, and compassionate progressives, and even new progressives. They're joining our movement every day. This is gonna be amazing when we work together. So our community members are learning together, they're building lifelong relationships, and even politically organizing together. Here's what Power Slave Wolf has to say as they begin interacting with our community after making TYT their #1 trusted news source. Quote, I've been a TYT viewer since the Obama years and have since found them to be a far more trustworthy news source than most TV news outlets. Away from viewing TYT, I'm a musician, electric bass guitar, sim racer, satire enthusiast, and rollerblader. The latter being my main means of intense exercise. TYT, my local news. None of the stations in my area are Sinclair owned as far as I know, and comedy style news shows are my trusted news sources. The former and the latter both having something in common in that both have something that TV news sorely lacks: a very low tolerance for BS. So sign up for free at tyt.com/community. We're making it easier to connect, stay informed, and even take action.
Hi, I'm Bartholomew Joseph Kyle. I do audio for the main show, The Young Turks. I also do audio for Post Game. I started in 2006. I met Cenk Uygur at the Iraq for Sale screening that was directed by Robert Greenwald. And watching that, I want to figure out a way to be part of something that's genuine and authentic.
I'm your ice cream man. Stop me when I'm passing by.
The ice cream man is coming! Ma! Those out some money! The ice cream man is coming!
Stop with the questions. Celebrate.
Ice cream. Oh, my beloved ice cream bar. Oh, ice cream. Oh, ice cream. Ice cream. Ice cream.
What's up, everybody? If you're members, which all of you are because you're watching this, you actually get to enjoy the story that I was teasing all day about smoking trees, but didn't have enough time to get to in the main show. So perks of being a member, okay? It is Ice Cream Wednesdays, of course. Bart always comes correct. I'm running around, the day is chaos, and I usually forget.
That does look good.
Until I come in and Bart's like, here's what I brought today.
Thank you.
So Bart is, yeah, so.
Can I try a little bit?
Of course.
Okay, I want to try
I
this
have the Butterfinger ice cream. I love Butterfinger. It's my, it might be my favorite candy bar.
That's not Kellogg's.
I don't know. Is it
Okay.
Kellogg's? I hope it's not.
Oh my God, that's so good.
The thing
this
is
good too though. Blueberry cheesecake, low-fat frozen yogurt.
From Thrifty. I did try
good.
that earlier. It's
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah, both of them are good. Thank you guys.
So the thing about Ice Cream Wednesdays is I just don't want to work and I want to eat the ice cream and just talk.
And not do stories.
Yeah, but there's so many
That's
good
the whole
stories
idea.
that we have to get to, including the one that we didn't get to in the main show. So let's do it. Let's talk about it. And by the way, thank you to the members who have written in and agree that Netflix and Chill is the best. It is in fact very delicious.
I don't know if it's the best, but it's good.
It's the best.
Miracle
Although
Dream is good. Justice Remix, Cinnamon Buns.
cinnamon buns
It's a
is
lot of good
okay.
You're ridiculous.
It doesn't really taste like cinnamon buns.
I think it tastes pretty cinnamony. I mean, look, Justice Remixed is more cinnamony. It's very good. But American Dream is so good. There's so many good flavors.
I do like cinnamon. Yeah.
Me too. It's underrated.
Yeah, people are saying cinnamon is delicious. All right, so let's get to smoking trees.
Oh my God.
I'm just so amused by the story. All right, there you have it. Last night, the Christmas tree outside of the Fox News studios in Manhattan was lit ablaze. Does this prove that there is in fact a war on Christmas? Well, here's Fox News breaking the news to its audience.
Breaking news for you tonight. You're looking at live images. This is the Fox Square in New York, outside of Fox headquarters. It appears that our giant Christmas tree there, just a couple minutes ago, was completely engulfed in flames. It appears crews are there on the scene. You see the smoke in the aftermath as they're trying to get that under control. We're going to keep you posted. It is a large, beautiful, highly decorated tree right there on the Avenue of the Americas, 6th Avenue there in New York City. But our thanks to the crews who look like they've just about got that thing under control.
Now, what went awry? Like, who did this? Was this a member of Antifa?
Was it Kamala Harris?
Was it a member of the Democratic Party?
Oh, damn.
Was this a product of left-wing extremism, anti-Christmas behavior? Is that what happened?
Anti-Kringle behavior.
You're gonna have to wait and find out, guys. You're gonna have to wait and find out. Now, of course, before they even had the facts, before they knew anything about the perpetrator, Fox News jumped at the opportunity to blame this on the left and also fearmonger about rising crime.
Did this to spoil our Christmas, but that's not going to happen. This Scrooge is not going to get away with it.
This is part of a bigger problem. It's the crime surge in this country. I'm just going through, taking notes to think, okay, what are we going to do on crime today? From Chicago to Philadelphia to Los Angeles, San Francisco to Beverly Hills on down. There is so much crime in places that were always safe, including 48th and 6th here. This is emblematic of these cities out of control. Defame and defund the police, and this bail reform that has these men and women, these assailants, these suspects out before they even can finish off the paperwork. This is what you get if you have these left-wing DAs and officials running these major cities. You get chaos.
You know what? I mean, I think Kilmeade is really speaking truth there, to be honest. I mean, we do have a problem with violent crime in this country. I mean, just last week, we learned of another school shooting where a teenager somehow had access to a firearm and opened fire in his school, killing 4 of his classmates. I mean, we really need to do something about this.
I read about a case where a kid went to a protest and shot a couple people and got away with it.
No guilty.
No, he's not guilty. In fact, he's like going bragging about it on TV shows now. There's a big problem with criminality in this country.
I'm sure Kilmeade wants to do a lot about that, except he doesn't. So the man who burnt the tree did in fact get caught. He is now in custody. An NBC News 4 employee in New York saw police arresting a man near the tree. A spokesperson for New York City Police Department confirmed that a man was in fact taken into custody. I want to move over to graphic number 3 because a police department spokesperson confirmed a 49-year-old man was in custody. And I want to just reiterate for all the conservatives hate watching right now. A police department spokesperson not only confirmed that the man was in custody, police also say the man acted alone. And here's the important part, get a load of this. The incident didn't appear to be premeditated or politically motivated. So this was not.
So it's different than the commentary about the act then.
It appears that is the case. It appears that is the case. So that is according to the police, okay? So nurse your tears. Because the war on Christmas narrative, the left-wing extremist argument does not apply in pretty much any case, but certainly not in this case.
Yeah, and look, if you are overall worried about crime, which largely when there is an increase in either property or violent crime, it's not affecting people like the hosts on Fox and Friends. It's affecting other, generally people of lower socioeconomic status. So they pretend to care about it, using it as a political cudgel. They don't really care, and you hardly get to imply that a lone person committing an act of vandalism, as bad as it might be, is this major systemic problem that we need to reverse. What the elections of DAs somehow, we need to do that. When you've spent the entire year implying that an entire mob of people going to the Capitol and setting fires and trying to beat cops to death and stuff wasn't actually something we need to worry about. And I honestly don't think that they care. They say it's not gonna ruin our Christmas. Why would it? It's not her tree. Like seriously, it's not Ainsley Earhart's tree.
No, John, you're being unfair.
So happy.
You're being so happy. Unfair to Ainsley. She is brave. She is brave. She is not gonna let this tragedy stop her from enjoying her lavish Christmas holiday.
She said on video, no more music, no more trees. What did he set fire to a trumpet? Why is the music suddenly canceled? This is so opportunistic. This is literally the best thing that will happen to them between now and New Year's. Does anyone dispute that? How happy they are? They saw those flames, and I was gonna say something really dirty, but they were excited about this development. I will say that they were happy about it.
They were hot. They were hot and heavy.
The tree wasn't the only thing that was heating up. And I'm gonna say what I said on TDR. Look, property crime is wrong, arson is wrong. That is the most badass tree ever in that moment. That tree has never looked better. If the tree was sentient, it would be happy that it was on fire, because that is a festive ass tree.
It's hilarious. All right, well, one of the other people who was really disturbed by the scene was Meghan McCain. She's still around, and her tweet, I'm not gonna lie, amused me to the point where I just could not stop laughing. Like I was tearing up. I don't want to hear anything about how radical some of you believe Republicans to be when there are lunatics running around New York City setting Fox News Christmas trees on fire. She doesn't want to hear it. She doesn't want to hear it. Now, of course, this has nothing to do with the left wing, as we've already explained. But I just want to counter. I know she doesn't want to hear it, but maybe she wants to see it. Maybe she wants to see it. Here's what I think extremism looks like. Here's Thomas Massey's Christmas photo with his family, where each one of his family members, including his children, including the daughter sitting next to him, who he appears to want to kneecap, is holding weapons, every single one of them, holding dangerous weapons, pointing in directions that they should not be pointing in. Yeah. Like the mom looks like she wants to shoot the son, and the flannel shirt behind her. Like it's just, that looks pretty extreme to me. I don't know.
I don't know, when I see that, I just can't help but think of Jesus. You know, this is what he would want. A lot of people loaded for bear. Yeah, it's performative. It is at least as performative as someone setting fire to a Christmas tree.
And look,
it doesn't look as cool.
We do have a poll on this. Yes, we stole your poll from the damage report. Okay. So we want to know what you think. How do you feel about Fox's Christmas tree being burned down? The war on Christmas is real, or burn, baby, burn?
I am curious to see how the results will compare from the two audiences, actually.
TYT.com/polls to participate. We can't wait to find out what you think. By the way, majority of the audience disagreed with my take, and I believe Cenk's take as well, about a San Francisco restaurant that kicked cops out because they're armed.
The question was whether they should do that or not?
Yeah.
You said that they shouldn't.
Shouldn't. I mean, the reason why, look, the reason why I don't think they should have done that is because they're required, like it's their job. They're required to be armed, and
I would need more details.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They literally, like, from what I've read, they didn't do anything. They were just armed cops that wanted to get lunch at some restaurant in San Francisco, and they got kicked out.
This is the left-wing stuff that results in flaming Christmas trees.
I just know what it's like when I'm hungry during a work day and I can't access food because we're in a food desert, really, where we're at. We're in a food desert. We're in a food desert.
There used to be the food trucks. That's when the pandemic will truly be over, when those come back.
I hate where the studio is located. I hate the area, like so much, like more than I can explain, like so much.
I don't dislike it. There's an area, it's not that far to the place we used to eat.
Non-stop congestion, non-stop construction.
Oh my God, try to get here in the morning coming from the south. That bridge is out. Yeah.
It's not for me, it's for other people.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Let me get a bite of ice cream first, though.
Oh yes, priorities, everybody.
We deserve it.
It's the holidays.
We got to get a little taste of that ice cream between stories. Why not?
Ice cream. So good, the blueberries.
Butterfingers where it's at. Oh. By the way, my favorite thing is when you guys know I'm stoned at night while I'm tweeting.
Like, what are you doing?
You guys always know.
Was that when you were tweeting about the baseball guy?
Manfred? No, that was during the day yesterday when I was reading up on the MLB lockout. No, Okay, I tend to tweet about food.
Yeah.
So like the Chessman cookies from Pepperidge Farms.
Oh yes.
They're my favorite. The butter cookies.
Well,
they're so good.
They're good.
No,
I mean, I
they're
don't
the
think they're the best
They're the
or
best.
anything.
They're the best. And one of you actually gave me the tip on using those cookies instead of vanilla wafers in banana pudding. And I tried it for the first time and it was amazing.
Okay, that does
Made
sound
me
good
cry.
and like something you do in your high, yeah.
It's delicious. All right, let's poor Laura Oglesby. Let's talk about Laura Oglesby. So, perfect video for this. All right, so at some point we all go through midlife crises. I'm nowhere near it, but you might have gone through that. And so you might feel a little bit of sympathy for poor Laura Oglesby, who wanted to relive her college days by, just stealing her daughter's identity and then racking up a bunch of student loan debt in her estranged daughter's name. There she is. This is one of the strangest stories ever, okay?
That's not a mugshot, right? They don't let you wear the ears for a mugshot, right? That's the most lenient cops ever.
I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is the mugshot. The citation indicates that it is from Facebook. So I'm hoping that's the case.
Okay.
Now, with that said, she was arrested in 2018 because she had been using her daughter's identity fraudulently, and she had racked up a bunch of debt in her daughter's name. Now, her daughter is described as her estranged daughter, so she's not speaking with her own child, but she is using her identity to relive her college days. Now, investigators say that 45-year-old Laura Oglesby had stolen and assumed her 24-year-old estranged daughter's name, Lauren Ashley Hayes, and identity for at least the past 2 years. Now, how did she do this? Well, the detective investigating this case says, she told me that she had taken her daughter's birth certificate, came to Missouri and was able to obtain a new identity using that birth certificate. She's from Arkansas. So she goes from Arkansas to Missouri with her daughter's identity and starts using it to do all sorts of things, including go back to college. Now, Laura Oglesby was able to obtain a new Social Security card using the birth certificate. She took that Social Security card and applied for a Missouri driver's license. She took the exam and obtained a driver's license. Hold on. Yeah, and obtained a driver's license. Though through that, she was able to work at various local businesses and actually obtain employment through the city of Mountain View.
Okay, so she's working, she's driving legally. It's a great story so far.
This is so messed up. Like how did the system let this, how did she slip through the cracks?
I guess those two states don't talk much.
But here's a real question. Criminal or American hero? No, I'm just kidding. She's not an American hero.
I love the idea of someone at like the DMV in Missouri who's like looking at the paperwork and then looking at her, then look at the paperwork like, she don't look 21, but I'm not calling Arkansas about it.
No, but okay, you guys, that's the thing that gets to me, right? She looks good. I'm not hating. I'm not.
I like the ears.
She looks great. She does not look like she's 24 years old. Like how did this like slip through the cracks? Now, in addition to this,
another masks are to blame.
No, she got
put on the mask.
She was finally arrested in 2018. We're now learning about like the charges and all of that stuff. But like this was before the pandemic. There ain't no masks. There was a couple in Missouri who took her in because they're like, oh, it's a young student, she's struggling, she needs a place to stay. They took her in.
Somebody needs to turn this into a movie.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing what she pulled off.
Yeah.
A couple.
She was at college?
Adults, they were adults. A couple consisting of adults looked at this woman and were like, yeah, yep, she's definitely in her early 20s.
She's like,
definitely.
She's like the talented Mrs. Ripley. Like she just convinces everyone. And also, by the way, I think the villain in this story, you haven't really identified yet, is probably the daughter, because that mom did more with her identity in 2 years than that daughter ever would have. She moved. She got a license, she's working, she's going to college. Who among us has done that much in a 2-year span? Like she is living someone else's best life.
She's kind of amazing. In fact, she was so good at getting away with this for so long. It is a skill. It is a talent. One might argue that they should let her go. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
The student loan debt's like the worst part because
all of it is bad.
They're probably gonna hold that to the daughter for the rest of her life.
She did this to her own flesh and blood. And by the way, identity theft is one of the worst experiences to have to go through. And you should freeze your credit bureau accounts and then unfreeze them whenever you're applying for a credit card or something, because people be stealing identities.
You're saying we should just go and freeze our accounts right now?
It's insane if you haven't already done that. After the Equifax breach.
What are you talking about? You could just go and freeze all of your accounts? How would that work?
No, it's not. You don't freeze your accounts. You know how there's credit bureaus?
Yeah.
You can put a freeze through your credit bureau. So anytime like someone wants to open an account under your name, they won't be able to do it. They have to. Only you can do it because only you have the power to unfreeze the credit bureau account.
What if they steal the credit bureau part of your identity?
I mean, then I guess you're out of luck. I don't know.
Oh no, don't. If you're a criminal, don't listen to what I just said.
No, it's tough. Like they give you all sorts of like, there's like added security that I think helps.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good. We should take it seriously.
You should take it seriously.
Especially if your mom's kind of shady.
Now,
Dad ain't going back to
especially
college.
if you got a cute looking mom who's going through a midlife crisis, she wants to get her ass back to that college campus.
Hang out at the co-op. Yep.
So the Averys, by the way,
join an a cappella group.
Oh my God, look at she just wanted to have fun.
Exactly, she did. Look at the ears. That's demonstrable proof she had fun. I don't look that happy on Facebook.
Oh my God.
Oh.
What do you think we're gonna be like when we experience a midlife crisis?
I'm like in the middle of one right now. I wrote a book about animals. I don't know what you're gonna do. I know what I did.
Look at that guy, yes.
Yeah,
get it,
get
Poppy.
that car. That's JR's midlife crisis.
That's me every night. I'm not even experiencing the midlife crisis yet.
That's Marjorie Greene's midlife crisis. I think the yoga instructor was hers actually.
I actually picture Anna's midlife crisis making the ultimate TV entertainment center out of wood.
Ooh,
I can see
yeah.
that.
Maybe,
that's a productive use of your time.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to be productive midlife crisis or not, but it happens to the best of us. Come on, we all experience. It's midlife. It means you've already lived half your life and you're going to die.
And
like it's when you realize you're going to die, and that you haven't lived up to your potential. That's like the biggest thing, right? Because we all have these like grandiose like thoughts about where we're going to be at a certain point in our lives. None of us actually get there because life sucks, and then we're going to feel really bad about ourselves, and we're going to lash out in weird ways. The question is, what ways are we going to lash out in? What are you gonna buy a sports car? Probably not.
I mean, I've already got a high performance Scion IQ, please.
Exactly.
That thing will go 0 to 60, maybe.
All right. Oh, we got 5 minutes left. We gotta get off of it. Oh, by the way, one final point to this. So Oglesby did plead guilty to 1 count of furnishing false information to the Social Security Administration. She faces 5 years in prison and will have to pay back $17,521 in restitution to the university, as well as restitution to her daughter.
That makes sense. It is my last point in this.
Yeah.
This has not been a good like week and a half of news for families. Like, she's taking the identity of her estranged daughter. The Crumbleys are like handing out guns and then fleeing the country. Lauren Boebert's like, hey, mama's got a grift, take this gun and pose in a photo, using your kids as political pawns. Like, what's happened to the traditional family in America? What?
Yeah.
Oh no, what'd you see?
I just love that Zappa Hart is someone get Anna those churro chips.
Oh my God, those are so good.
Brett,
Those are so
yes,
good.
Brett,
You could
yes.
put them in the ice cream.
Ice cream. All right, listen.
I'm good. But they are very, very good though.
We have a Viagra / Alzheimer's story that we're not going to get to today because we're running out of time. We will do it tomorrow, but it is awesome. It is a great story. But no, the thing I wanted to read was Zappa Hart's
The Viagra and Alzheimer's story. We were like totally ready to go with that story, but then we forgot.
You don't get enough credit for how funny you are. You're really
I've
funny.
always said that.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
All right, listen, Zappa fan. I want to be clear. I'm joking around about this mother, this fraudster getting away with it. She is not an American hero. He writes, the woman is a grifter who screwed up her daughter, possibly forever. She should go to prison. Well, looks like she's gonna be going to prison.
Yeah, probably.
And I agree, yeah. I mean, identity fraud is disastrous.
No, but it's not gonna work though. They're gonna send her to prison. First day, she's gonna like knock on her bars or whatever. The guard is gonna come. The guard's gonna be like, what is it? She's gonna say, oh, actually, I'm the guard, you're the prisoner. And he's gonna be like, oh, okay, and then they're gonna swap. Because she could get away with literally anything. They're gonna believe that she runs that place in a week.
Good for her, man.
Yeah.
Hate the player, no.
It's so
like, don't hate the player, hate the game.
I would buy this level of manipulation from an older woman, but a 24-year-old. Like, how did she develop these skills that fast?
It's pretty impressive.
Anyway.
Pretty impressive. All right. Thank you guys for watching.
Is that it?
We got a few more minutes. But I do want to give Brett some love because his show's awesome and it airs immediately after this one ends. So just go to twitch.tv/TYT to watch Happy Half Hour. The bracket today is Best Christmas Song.
Would you want to bias the results? What do you think the best Christmas song is?
I like the Mariah Carey song.
Oh my God, that's the only answer.
That is the only answer.
All I Want for Christmas Is You, it's the best one. It's the first single I ever bought. It's true, and probably the last, honestly, because I don't like music. But no, it's the best song. There are some good Christmas songs, including like religious-y Christmas songs. I really like Carol the Bells. There's a few, but
how does Carol the Bells go again? I'm really bad
Maybe
with
he can
titles.
find it on the thing. But
Does someone want to sing it?
I'm not musical, but no, but it's good.
In terms of like traditional Christmas songs that always make me feel like warm and cozy, I like the one that goes da 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 da.
Yeah, that's the Home Alone one. That's the Home Alone one.
Yeah.
I also like, I know that you're not supposed to, but I like, aside from the content of it, Baby It's Cold Outside. That's like a classic. It's got a cool vibe. There's not a lot of conversational songs like that.
Wait, what's I don't remember the lyrics. Is it problematic?
It's a guy like super pressuring a woman not to leave when she wants to leave.
Isn't that like most music?
Yeah, but this one got picked. I don't know.
Okay, all right.
But yes, and it is. They've got new versions of it and stuff.
Yeah, culture be changing.
It does.
And that's a good thing.
It does, and it's an old song. It had decades.
Yeah.
Okay, we can change it a little.
All right, I'm curious to see what wins. So again, twitch.tv/TYT to watch Happy Half Hour, which you can do right after we say, you ready? Bye-bye.